The North Sea has long earned its reputation as one of the world's deadliest waters, a restless expanse where sudden storms, hidden shoals and shifting currents claim the unwary. Beneath its grey, windswept surface lie secrets that defy explanation, vanished ships, sunken submarines, and inexplicable phenomena that continue to puzzle historians, sailors and scientists alike. For centuries, mariners have spoken of eerie echoes, ghostly lights, and sudden disappearances that leave no trace, as if the sea itself conceals a memory too vast to comprehend. Through turbulent channels, shadowed depths, and isolated coastlines, you will traverse the sites of these enduring mysteries. From the skeletal remains of shipwrecks along the Goodwin Sands to the haunting graves of submarines in the Skagerrak, each location tells a story of human ambition clashing with the unforgiving ocean. You will encounter the vanished crews of lighthouses, the remnants of sunken vessels, and the echoes of naval catastrophes, each revelation immersing you in a North Sea that remains as enigmatic as it is merciless. The vanishing of the Flannan Isles lighthouse keepers. A narrow outcrop of black rock rises from the Atlantic edge of Scotland, lashed by cold winds and shifting seas that funnel toward the northern reaches of the North Sea. On that isolated fragment of land, known as Eilean Moor in the Flannan Isles, 3 lighthouse keepers vanished in December 1900 without leaving a clear explanation behind. The disappearance of James Ducat, Thomas Marshall, and Donald MacArthur remains one of the most enduring maritime mysteries connected to these waters. Their absence was not discovered immediately, and the delay only deepened the strangeness of what would eventually be found inside the lighthouse. The Flannan Isles lie roughly 20 miles west of the Isle of Lewis in the Outer Hebrides, a lonely archipelago where cliffs drop sharply into restless water. The lighthouse itself had been completed in 1899 by the Northern Lighthouse Board to guide vessels navigating the hazardous routes around Scotland's northern coast. Built of solid masonry and standing about 75 feet tall, it was designed to withstand the severe weather that regularly battered the region. Its keepers worked in rotating shifts, maintaining the light, recording weather conditions, and ensuring that the lantern never failed during the long winter nights. Life on Eilean Moor was structured by strict routines and isolation. 3 men were stationed on the island at any one time, while a 4th remained on shore as relief. James Ducat served as principal keeper, Thomas Marshall as second assistant, and Donald MacArthur as occasional replacement. Supplies arrived periodically by tender from the mainland, and communication was limited to passing ships and scheduled visits. The keepers kept detailed logs, documenting wind direction, sea conditions, and maintenance tasks, a habit that would later provide investigators with their final recorded impressions of the days before they disappeared. The first sign that something was wrong came from a passing vessel. On December 15, 1900, the captain of the steamer Arctur noted that the lighthouse was dark as his ship passed the islands at night. Such a failure was serious, yet storms in the region could delay response. It was not until December 26 that the relief ship Hesperus, under the command of Captain James Harvey, was able to approach Eilean Moor due to rough weather. As the ship neared the island, no one appeared on the landing platform to receive it, an unusual silence that unsettled the crew. Joseph Moore, the relief keeper, was sent ashore to investigate. He later reported an atmosphere of profound stillness as he climbed the steep path toward the lighthouse. Inside, the scene was orderly. The beds were unmade, suggesting recent use, and the kitchen table held plates and provisions. A clock had stopped, but there were no signs of struggle or violence. Oilskins, which the men would normally wear during severe weather, were missing from the hooks, though one set reportedly remained. The lighthouse lamp had been cleaned and refilled, indicating that the men had carried out their duties before vanishing. Attention soon turned to the final logbook entries. The last dated entry was made on December 15th by Thomas Marshall. It recorded strong winds and stormy conditions over the preceding days, along with references to one of the keepers being unusually quiet. Another entry mentioned that Ducat had been praying, an unusual note that fueled later speculation, although such remarks were not unheard of in personal logs. By December 15th, the weather was described as moderating, and the final line noted that the storm had ended and the sea was calm. Meteorological records from nearby stations, however, suggests that severe storms may not have struck the area at the precise times recorded, introducing uncertainty about the true conditions. Investigators from the Northern Lighthouse Board, including Superintendent Robert Muirhead, examined the site in early January 1901. Their official conclusions suggested that the men had likely been swept away while attempting to secure equipment on the western landing platform. Evidence indicated that heavy seas had damaged a supply box and displaced a large stone weighing over a ton. The west side of Alien Moor was particularly exposed to Atlantic swells, and rogue waves were known to crash high against the cliffs. If 2 men had gone down to secure gear during a storm, the third may have followed, leaving the lighthouse unattended. Yet several details resist simple explanation. Lighthouse regulations generally required at least 1 keeper to remain inside at all times to tend the light. Leaving the post entirely, especially during deteriorating weather, would have been a serious breach of protocol. The missing oilskins raised further questions, since at least 1 set remained behind, implying that 1 man might have gone outside improperly dressed for a storm. The absence of bodies, though not unusual in violent seas, deprived investigators of physical evidence that could confirm the theory of accidental drowning. Over the decades, alternative explanations have emerged, though none are supported by direct proof. Some have suggested that a single enormous wave struck unexpectedly, carrying all 3 men into the sea within moments. Others have speculated about interpersonal conflict, though no sign of struggle was found, and no known disputes were documented in official records. Folklore in the Hebrides spoke of supernatural forces or ancient spirits inhabiting the islands, tales that gained traction in popular retellings but lack substantiation in contemporary reports. The stark environment itself, with its isolation and relentless exposure to wind and surf, may have amplified such imaginings. Modern analyses tend to return to environmental factors. The western landing platform, located about 110 feet above sea level, showed signs of significant storm damage, including twisted iron railings. Oceanographers have noted that waves in extreme conditions can reach surprising heights, especially when amplified by underwater topography. A sudden surge could have overwhelmed the men before they had time to react, particularly if they were focused on securing cargo during deteriorating weather. Even so, the absence of witnesses and the inconsistencies in recorded weather reports prevent a definitive reconstruction of events. More than a century later, the lighthouse still stands on Alien Moor, automated and uninhabited, its beams sweeping across the same treacherous waters. The story of Duckett, Marshall, and MacArthur has entered maritime lore, not because of dramatic evidence, but because of the quiet normality of what was left behind. An intact lamp, a prepared meal, an orderly room, and a final log entry that offers no confession or farewell create a narrative suspended between routine and catastrophe. The North Sea routes remain among the busiest in Europe, yet that isolated tower recalls a moment when 3 experienced men stepped outside and were never seen again. And somewhere beyond those cliffs, the sea keeps whatever answer it took from Alien Moor. The disappearance of the FV Gaul. Radio contact with the trawler ceased without warning in the early days of February 1974, and from that silence emerged one of the most troubling maritime disappearances linked to the North Sea fishing fleets. The vessel was the FV Gaul, a British freezer-stern trawler operating from Hull, and when it failed to report as expected, there was no distress call, no fragmented transmission, no immediate debris field to mark disaster. In an industry accustomed to brutal weather and sudden loss, the absence of even a final message stood out sharply. What followed would stretch far beyond a single winter storm, unfolding into decades of doubt, suspicion, and unanswered questions. Constructed only 2 years earlier in Beverley, the Gaul belonged to a class of modern stern trawlers designed to process and freeze catches on board, allowing longer voyages into distant waters. Owned by British United Trawlers, the ship measured around 235 feet in length and was built for operations in the icy Barents Sea fishing grounds, reached by passing north through routes connected to the North Sea. Its design reflected economic pressures of the time, as British distant water fleets sought efficiency and higher yields in increasingly competitive fisheries. Yet some vessels of a similar type had already raised quiet concerns about stability in extreme conditions. Departure from Hull in January 1974 appeared routine, with 36 crewmen aboard and holds prepared for weeks of fishing in northern waters. The distant water fleet regularly transited through the North Sea before turning toward the Norwegian coast and beyond to the Barents Sea, where cod stocks remained profitable despite political tensions and harsh weather. Early radio communications indicated nothing unusual, and the vessel continued toward its intended grounds near Norway's North Cape. Then, in early February, communication stopped entirely. No Mayday signal was recorded, and scheduled contact windows passed without response, leaving shore operators uncertain whether equipment failure or something more serious had occurred. Initial explanations formed quickly once the vessel failed to report, as severe Arctic weather was considered a sufficient and familiar culprit. Meteorological records confirm that strong winds and heavy seas affected the Barents region during that period, and trawlers operating there were frequently exposed to icing conditions that could compromise stability. In the absence of physical evidence, authorities concluded that the most probable cause was capsizing in heavy weather. The assumption carried weight because fishing in those waters had long been understood as inherently dangerous. Yet probability is not proof, and for many, the speed with which the explanation settled felt premature. In the fishing communities of Hull, however, acceptance did not come as easily as the official statement suggested. Families of the missing men pressed for clarity, pointing out that freezer-stern trawlers had been subject to technical criticism. Some maritime observers had raised concerns about the distribution of weight in these vessels, especially when water accumulated on deck or when ice built up on superstructures. If stability margins were narrower than publicly acknowledged, then heavy seas alone might not fully account for the loss. The absence of wreckage compounded the unease, because without a hull to inspect, structural failure remained speculation rather than fact. Whispers of a different possibility began circulating years later, shaped by the tense climate of the Cold War and the vessel's proximity to sensitive Soviet naval areas. The Barents Sea lay near significant Soviet military installations, and fishing vessels from Western nations operated within a region thick with surveillance and suspicion. Some former trawlermen would later allege that certain fishing ships were occasionally used to observe naval movements or to support intelligence-gathering efforts, though concrete documentation regarding the Gaul has never confirmed. Even so, the era's secrecy left room for conjecture, and the idea that the trawler's mission might not have been entirely commercial gained traction among those unwilling to accept a simple weather-related tragedy. When the original Board of Trade inquiry delivered its findings in 1974, it relied largely on probability rather than physical evidence recovered from the seabed. The inquiry concluded that the vessel most likely succumbed to severe weather and capsized rapidly, preventing any distress transmission. There was no indication of collision or hostile action presented in the official report. Yet critics argued that without locating the wreck, such conclusions rested on inference. The lack of debris recovered from the surface was noted but not deemed inconsistent with a sudden sinking in deep water, where currents and ice could disperse material beyond easy detection. Persistent campaigning by relatives gradually reopened, a case many authorities believed had already been settled. Through the 1980s and 1990s, families sought access to documents and pressed for renewed investigation, arguing that unanswered technical questions deserved independent review. The efforts coincided with a broader reassessment of maritime safety standards and design practices. The passage of time did not dull the need for clarity. Instead, it sharpened the sense that something essential remained unexplained. Pressure mounted for a search capable of locating the wreck itself, because only direct examination could move the discussion beyond theoretical models and recollections. Everything shifted in 1998 when Norwegian surveyors identified a wreck in deep water that was later confirmed to be the Gaul. Lying at a depth of roughly 900 feet, the vessel was found largely intact on the seabed. The discovery provided long-sought coordinates but did not immediately deliver definitive answers. Images revealed structural damage consistent with severe sea forces, yet interpretation required caution. The position of the hull and the condition of compartments suggested a rapid and catastrophic event, though the precise sequence remained uncertain. For the first time, the mystery had a physical anchor, even if it still resisted a simple explanation. A formal reopening of the investigation followed, culminating in a detailed reappraisal completed in 2004. This re-examination analysed vessel design, loading patterns, weather data, and possible water ingress scenarios. The findings suggested that heavy seas combined with design vulnerabilities could have caused progressive flooding, leading to a swift capsize that afforded no time for a distress signal. No evidence supported theories of collision or external attack, and espionage claims remained unsubstantiated. Still, the report acknowledged limitations inherent in reconstructing events from a wreck resting on the seabed for decades, where corrosion and impact with the ocean floor may obscure crucial details. Yet even with modern analysis and underwater imaging, certain elements refuse to align into a single uncontested narrative. The absence of a Mayday call continues to trouble observers, because even in extreme emergencies, crews often manage at least a brief transmission. Questions about stability margins, icing effects, and water on deck remain central to understanding how quickly disaster unfolded. While official findings attribute the sinking to environmental and structural factors, the combination of rapid loss, Cold War context, and years of limited transparency ensures that doubt has not entirely faded from public memory. Despite decades of inquiry and the wreck resting in known coordinates, the precise sequence of moments that erased the Gaul from the surface has never been definitively established. The Piper Alpha catastrophe. Piper Alpha had operated as a cornerstone of the North Sea energy network for nearly a decade, its decks bustling with routine production activity before the night of July 6, 1988, transformed it into a scene of devastation. The platform sat in the Piper oil field, roughly 120 miles northeast of Aberdeen, Scotland, and had become one of the most productive installations in the North Sea. On that summer evening, nothing about the operation suggested impending catastrophe. Yet, beneath the hum of machinery and the measured rhythm of offshore life, a chain of hidden vulnerabilities and procedural oversights was quietly converging toward disaster. Originally designed to process crude oil, the platform had been modified over time to handle volatile gas condensates, a change that added complexity to its engineering and heightened operational risks. These modifications were intended to maximize production capacity, but they introduced new hazards. The integration of gas processing systems with older oil infrastructure created additional pathways for leaks, and some firewalls and safety mechanisms were no longer adequate for the increased volatility of the materials on board. Piper Alpha represented both technological advancement and the unseen dangers of evolving industrial systems. Earlier that day, routine maintenance had been performed on one of the condensate pumps, and a vital safety valve was temporarily removed and sealed, a fact that would later prove pivotal in the disaster. The maintenance records, kept in strict accordance with offshore procedures, noted that the valve was inoperative and that the pump should remain offline until repairs were complete. However, the communication of this status was incomplete. The chain of responsibility between day and night shifts failed to convey the critical detail that restarting the pump would bypass the safety measure, leaving the system vulnerable to a sudden release of pressurized gas. A shift change brought new personnel to the control room, and critical information about the pump's status failed to transfer accurately, leaving operators unaware that restarting the system carried hidden dangers. Documents were left unsigned or misplaced, and verbal briefings were partially omitted. The incoming team assumed the pump was fully operational and safe to use. In high-pressure environments such as offshore platforms, assumptions about routine machinery can become lethal when combined with incomplete data. That evening, these small lapses converged with mechanical vulnerability in a way that no single operator could have foreseen. Shortly after the pump was reactivated, a catastrophic gas leak ignited, causing an initial explosion that overwhelmed firewalls and structural barriers that were never intended to contain a blast of that magnitude. Flames engulfed the platform's upper decks, spreading with alarming rapidity through gas-filled corridors. The first explosion destroyed control systems and critical instrumentation, rendering many emergency procedures ineffective. Workers in proximity to the blast had little time to react, and the force of the explosion created secondary fires that consumed additional decks. Within moments, the platform had shifted from routine operation to full-scale disaster. Emergency shutdown systems and fire suppression mechanisms designed to contain incidents did not fully engage, revealing vulnerabilities in both design and operational protocol that allowed the inferno to escalate. Investigators later determined that automated shutdowns were partially disabled in areas due to maintenance and operational modifications, and manual overrides were either inaccessible or unstaffed. Water deluge systems failed to reach certain gas-rich zones, and the interlinked pipeline system allowed the fire to propagate faster than emergency teams could respond. The technical and procedural failures created conditions in which a single incident could not be contained, and the platform's entire infrastructure became a conduit for destruction. The platform's interconnection with surrounding North Sea installations via gas pipelines intensified the disaster, as continued pumping fed the flames, while hesitation among operators delayed complete shutdowns. Gas lines leading to remote sections of the field allowed fuel to continue flowing into the inferno, sustaining explosions that travelled through connected modules. Operators faced uncertainty and confusion, compounded by a lack of immediate, reliable communication with onshore control. Each decision to delay or redirect flows, while intended to manage risk, instead contributed to the sequence that made the incident so deadly, turning an industrial accident into a catastrophic conflagration. Escape routes were rapidly blocked, lifeboats became inaccessible, and smoke filled corridors with lethal speed, trapping workers and leaving 167 men dead, while 61 survived, their testimonies later critical to understanding the catastrophe. Survivors described corridors that had become impassable within minutes and stairwells engulfed in flame. Some attempted to reach muster stations or deploy lifeboats, only to find them destroyed or isolated. The speed and scale of the fire prevented an orderly evacuation, and those who escaped relied on luck, quick thinking, and knowledge of the platform's layout. Their accounts later helped investigators piece together the human impact of systemic failures. The Cullen Inquiry methodically examined the incident, highlighting a series of safety oversights, communication failures, and regulatory shortcomings that combined to create conditions for unparalleled loss of life. Lord Cullen's investigation meticulously traced the sequence of events, identifying deficiencies in permit-to-work systems, inadequate fireproofing, and gaps in training and supervision. The report concluded that the disaster was preventable and that systemic errors, rather than a single catastrophic event, had allowed the chain reaction to unfold. Findings emphasized both human and organizational accountability, revealing that even sophisticated safety systems could be undermined when layered with operational complexity and incomplete information. The aftermath prompted sweeping changes to offshore safety regulations, including the implementation of mandatory safety cases, yet the disaster's shadow remains a stark reminder of how reactive measures often follow preventable errors. New legislation mandated comprehensive hazard assessments, stricter maintenance protocols, and enhanced training for offshore personnel. The oil and gas industry, both in the UK and abroad, re-evaluated emergency systems and redundancy measures. Despite these reforms, Piper Alpha continues to serve as a case study in industrial risk, illustrating the consequences of underestimating the potential for cascading failures in complex high-stakes environments. Even decades later, analysts and survivors continue to study the sequence of errors, noting that no single mistake caused the tragedy, but rather a cascade of oversights, decisions, and flawed procedures that aligned with devastating precision. The disaster is unique not for the initial spark, but for the combination of mechanical, procedural, and human factors that allowed it to grow unchecked. Safety improvements address some vulnerabilities, yet the historical record remains a cautionary tale. When multiple safeguards fail in succession, even well-engineered platforms can be transformed into sites of unimaginable devastation, a fact that haunts engineers, regulators, and offshore workers alike. Because the most disturbing question is not how the platform exploded, but how many of the warnings were already present long before the first spark ignited the night. The HMS Affray's final signal. April 16, 1951 began like any other day in the North Sea training zone. Yet by evening, HMS Affray had vanished from sonar screens and radio frequencies, leaving only a final, incomplete transmission. The submarine, a post-war Amphion-class vessel, had been engaged in routine exercises just off the east coast of England, its skilled crew performing standard manoeuvres meant to refine submerged navigation and coordination. When the vessel failed to report at the end of its scheduled training period, the Royal Navy initially assumed a temporary communication lapse. Yet, within hours, the absence of contact became a cause for serious alarm. The waters of the North Sea, though familiar, held silent threats beneath their waves, and the Affray had disappeared into them without explanation, as if swallowed by the sea itself. The submarine itself was an Amphion-class vessel, purpose-built for post-war Royal Navy operations, designed to dive deep, move silently, and carry 75 men into the uncertain waters of northern Europe. Measuring roughly 293 feet in length and displacing 1,360 tons submerged, it was outfitted with advanced sonar and torpedo systems for its time, reflecting the Royal Navy's post-war focus on readiness in both the Atlantic and northern European theatres. Its design emphasised speed, endurance, and tactical flexibility, yet it operated under inherent limitations of mid-20th century submarine engineering, including pressure hull tolerances and emergency escape systems that were still experimental by contemporary standards. Even in calm seas, the submarine's hull bore the silent weight of immense underwater pressure, a constant reminder of the precarious balance between technology and the indifferent depths. Its crew, composed of seasoned sailors and officers, followed a structured training routine, their day marked by drills, equipment checks, and standard operational exercises that did not indicate impending disaster. Officers reviewed navigation plans and operational logs, while ratings conducted routine maintenance and tested communication equipment. Submerged drills were executed with precision, reflecting a regimented culture of discipline and efficiency that was typical aboard Royal Navy submarines. The men were accustomed to the risks of deep-sea operations, yet even familiarity cannot eliminate the uncertainty inherent in an unforgiving environment where a single miscalculation could cascade into catastrophe. Each man knew the dangers, yet no one anticipated the silence that would soon envelop them. Throughout the morning and afternoon, the Affray executed submerged manoeuvres, navigation drills, and communication exercises, all adhering to strict protocols that were meant to ensure safety in the challenging North Sea environment. The vessel maintained constant contact with surface support ships, providing updates on position and status at designated intervals. Observers on nearby vessels noted nothing unusual, as the submarine operated quietly beneath the waves, its movements unremarkable to those who had watched it countless times during similar exercises. The meticulous adherence to procedure, in retrospect, contrasts sharply with the suddenness of the events that would follow, hinting at how even perfect routine cannot fully guard against the unpredictable violence of the deep. The final message came in mid-evening, fragmented yet unmistakable, a routine. All stations report over, followed by partial replies that hinted at some irregularity, but revealed nothing definitive before silence fell. No distress signal was transmitted, no indication of mechanical failure or collision was recorded, leaving operators at the surface to grapple with a sudden, unexplainable absence. The brevity of the transmission has since been a focal point of speculation, suggesting either a rapid catastrophic event or a failure within the submarine's communication systems that coincided tragically with a deeper malfunction. The moment carried an almost ghostly quality, as if the vessel's last human echoes had been absorbed by the surrounding waters, leaving only questions in their wake. The Royal Navy responded immediately, dispatching surface vessels and coordinating sonar sweeps, but harsh currents, low visibility, and the depth of the waters complicated what might have seemed a straightforward recovery operation. Sonar searches covered hundreds of square miles, while aircraft and ships combed the area for debris or signs of the submarine. The North Sea's strong tides and variable weather added layers of difficulty, washing away potential surface evidence before it could be collected. Despite modern expectations, 1951 lacked the sophisticated deep-sea technology that would later aid in locating sunken submarines, leaving the Affray's disappearance shrouded in mystery for months. Even seasoned naval officers admitted that the silence of the sea seemed unusually complete, a void that deepened the sense of foreboding. Early speculation ranged from mechanical failure to collision or human error, yet each theory faltered against the fact that the waters were familiar, the crew experienced, and no wreckage had surfaced to provide clues. Some suggested that an internal systems malfunction, perhaps in the battery compartments or ballast tanks, could have triggered rapid flooding, while others considered the possibility of an undetected collision with debris or a submerged vessel. The absence of survivors or physical evidence left investigators dependent on indirect data, including the submarine's last reported positions, routine operational protocols, and the environmental conditions recorded during the exercise. Each scenario seemed plausible yet incomplete, feeding a sense of enigmatic inevitability. Investigators turned to the technical design of the submarine, considering pressurization systems, battery compartments, and escape hatches, examining how each component might have contributed to a rapid, silent descent to the seabed. Amphion-class submarines were equipped with multiple watertight compartments and safety measures, yet even minor structural compromise could result in catastrophic failure at depth. The inquiry also considered human factors, including the pressures of operational discipline and the challenges of emergency procedures, noting that even highly trained personnel may be unable to respond effectively in the event of sudden flooding or loss of buoyancy. Each possibility highlighted how fragile even modern engineering could be when subjected to the North Sea's unforgiving conditions. When HMS Affray was eventually located on the ocean floor, analysis of its hull and internal compartments provided partial insight but left critical questions unanswered, particularly concerning the sequence of events leading to its sudden disappearance. The vessel rested at approximately 90 metres, largely intact but with evidence of implosion and localised damage consistent with rapid internal collapse. While the discovery allowed investigators to examine structural failures and infer certain dynamics of the sinking, the exact moments leading to the crew's loss of control remained obscured. The ocean had preserved the vessel, but not the clarity of the events themselves, and the absence of conclusive evidence allowed imagination and speculation to fill the void left by silence. A formal inquiry followed, cataloguing design, operational and procedural factors, yet even with expert testimony and physical evidence, the Royal Navy could only outline possibilities rather than confirm the precise chain of failure. Conclusions pointed to a combination of mechanical vulnerability, potential human error and environmental factors, but no single cause could be definitively identified. The inquiry emphasised that despite advanced training, strict protocols and technological safeguards, submarines operate in a realm where uncertainty is unavoidable and where multiple small failures can compound with fatal consequences. The unanswered questions left a lingering sense that, beneath the waves, the submarine's final moments remained as inaccessible as the deep itself. Decades later, historians and naval analysts continue to study the vessel's final voyage, noting that no single fault explains its fate, and that the interplay of mechanical systems, human decisions and environmental factors remains frustratingly opaque. Books, documentaries and naval retrospectives revisit the disappearance of HMS Affray, highlighting the lessons learned in submarine design, safety and operational procedure. Yet the story retains an unsettling quality. A skilled crew, a technologically capable vessel, and known waters all converged in a disappearance that has never been fully understood, leaving its mysteries suspended beneath the North Sea for generations, a reminder of the fragile boundary between human mastery and the implacable depths. Even after 70 years, the precise sequence that silenced HMS Affray beneath the North Sea has never been reconstructed, leaving its last signal suspended in the depths. The Goodwin Sands ship graveyard. The Goodwin Sands stretched like an invisible trap beneath the southern North Sea, a shifting expanse where countless ships have vanished, leaving only scattered fragments and whispered legends behind. Stretching roughly 10 miles long and 2 miles wide, this shoal has long been a nightmare for mariners, earning the grim nickname Ship Graveyard of the North Sea. Over the centuries, waves and tides have claimed hundreds of vessels, from trading ships of the medieval era to modern fishing boats, many disappearing so suddenly that survivors were few, and the exact circumstances of their losses remain forever uncertain. Beneath the deceptive calm of the waters, powerful tides and ever-changing sandbanks transform the area hour by hour, creating channels that can swallow vessels without warning. The sands are shallow at their edges yet unpredictable at the centre, with the North Sea currents carving and reshaping the shoals constantly. Mariners who attempted to navigate these waters faced the risk of grounding or sudden capsizing, and charts often failed to capture the sand's latest shifts. Even small deviations from a planned course could send a ship into shallow banks that disappeared beneath rising tides in minutes, leaving crews stranded or the vessel entirely submerged. For centuries, mariners have recorded losses here, from merchant ships laden with goods to fishing boats that never returned, establishing the sands as one of Europe's most notorious maritime graveyards. Records from the 17th and 18th centuries describe fleets caught by sudden storms, the pounding surf breaking hulls against hidden shoals. Notable tragedies include the sinking of the Royal Charter in 1859, a mail packet carrying passengers and gold, which foundered in heavy seas off the sands. Even with modern navigation, losses continued, proving that centuries of experience and mapping could not tame this maritime menace. Even the most experienced captains found their charts unreliable, as fog, storms, and sudden squalls combined with the shifting sands to erase the familiar outlines of navigation channels. Mist would descend without warning, obscuring sandbanks that had appeared solid moments before, while strong winds could drive waves into narrow channels, making even routine passages treacherous. Mariners relied on landmarks visible from the shore, buoys and rudimentary compasses, yet the sand's mutability rendered all efforts imperfect. Many ships were lost in conditions so ordinary they seemed deceptively calm in hindsight, a reminder of the North Sea's subtle but deadly unpredictability. Survivors' accounts describe scrambling over decks in darkness, lifeboats swept away by tides, and crews stranded on sandbanks that could vanish beneath rising waters, leaving them at the mercy of the sea. In rare cases, fishermen or rescue crews would discover sailors clinging to debris days later, exhausted, soaked, and bewildered. These personal stories highlight the human cost of navigating the sands, yet for most ships there was no witness at all. Families waited in vain on distant shores, and the sea itself swallowed the details, leaving history with only fragments, rumours, and incomplete records to piece together the tragedies. Modern explorations using sonar and diving surveys have revealed remnants of vessels buried beneath layers of sediment, yet the exact number and identities of the wrecks remain elusive, concealed beneath the ever-moving sands. Archaeologists have mapped some of the largest wrecks, noting masts, anchors, and sections of hull partially visible at low tide. Yet new storms and tidal shifts often reburied evidence, erasing traces that had been painstakingly documented. Each discovery raises questions about how many ships are still hidden, their stories lost to shifting sands, and whether any vessel vanished in a manner that will never be understood. Historians face frustrating gaps in records, as many ships went missing without proper documentation, and what survived in logs and newspapers often conflicts with physical evidence discovered centuries later. Early reports frequently lacked precise coordinates, and names were occasionally misrecorded or confused. In some cases, a single storm claimed multiple vessels, making it difficult to determine which wreck corresponded to which ship. Even when wrecks are located, artifacts are often too scattered or deteriorated to provide definitive answers, leaving both historians and maritime enthusiasts in a state of perpetual uncertainty. Maritime folklore grew from these tragedies, with sailors warning of ghostly lights, phantom bells, and treacherous currents that seemed to conspire against anyone attempting to cross the sands. Tales of dead man's fingers appearing at the waterline or spectral ships that vanished as they approached the shoals reinforced the supernatural reputation of the area. Fishermen spoke in hushed tones of lights guiding sailors onto the sands only for them to meet ruin. Such stories, while unverified, convey the psychological weight of centuries of loss and the fear that the sands instill even among those who trust in skill and experience. Storms and shifting channels continually rewrite the landscape, uncovering wreckage one year and burying it the next, a ceaseless transformation that leaves even modern vessels wary of its hidden hazards. Researchers using bathymetric surveys and sonar mapping have documented entire shipwrecks submerged beneath thick layers of sand, sometimes for decades before storms reveal them again. Each revelation is fleeting. A mast may appear one winter only to be swallowed the following spring again. Mariners are reminded that the sand's memory is unreliable, and that what seems visible or safe one day may vanish with the tides the next. Despite centuries of observation and mapping attempts, the Goodwin Sands continue to resist precise understanding, their capacity to claim ships unchanged by advances in technology or knowledge. GPS, radar, and depth sounders have improved navigation, yet local knowledge and caution remain crucial. The North Sea's tides and storms are relentless, and the sands continue to shift with a subtle impermanence that eludes complete control. Even scientific studies cannot fully anticipate the next storm or the next vessel to encounter disaster, underscoring the area's enduring power and unpredictability. To this day, the sands evoke both fear and fascination, a graveyard where history, human error, and natural unpredictability intersect in a way that ensures its mysteries endure. Scholars, mariners, and divers alike are drawn to the site, some seeking historical knowledge, others driven by curiosity or the thrill of exploration. Yet the sands offer only fragments and fleeting glimpses, reminding all who approach that centuries of loss lie beneath the waves. The ship graveyard remains a place where the North Sea's power, mystery and danger converge, a timeless enigma for anyone daring to study or traverse it. Even as GPS and sonar probe the shifting seabed, the Goodwin Sands keep their silent tally, hiding countless stories beneath their ever-moving surface. The Silver Pit Crater Discovery. Off the east coast of England lies the Silver Pit, a deep depression in the North Sea whose abrupt contours have puzzled mariners and scientists alike for generations. Known to local fishermen long before modern surveys, the area stood out on nautical charts as a sudden anomaly. Waters that dropped sharply where the surrounding seabed sloped gently, creating treacherous currents that were both feared and respected. Sailors noted that winds and tides seemed to behave differently over the pit, producing unusual swells that could toss even experienced crews, giving the impression that the sea itself harboured a hidden intelligence, indifferent yet exacting, almost as if the trench concealed a secret only the waves knew. Unlike the surrounding seabed, which slopes gently and predictably, the pit plunges sharply, forming walls that rise almost vertically in some sections. Depth measurements vary from 30 to 70 metres in a matter of yards, defying the gradual underwater gradients found elsewhere in the southern North Sea. Its shape is irregular, almost elliptical, yet precise in ways that suggest a violent formation rather than a gradual geological shift. Sediment layers within the depression indicate a complex history, hinting at sudden underwater events interspersed with slower natural accumulation, leaving researchers debating whether glacial scouring, subterranean collapses, or some unknown force carved the trench. Fishermen first noticed the pit in the 19th century, reporting sudden changes in water depth, erratic currents, and unusual swells that seemed to defy normal tidal patterns. Nets would snag unexpectedly, even in areas previously safe, and compass readings sometimes wavered in inexplicable ways. Some accounts described vessels being momentarily held by strong undercurrents before breaking free, creating a sense that the pit exerted a subtle invisible influence over the surrounding waters. These early observations were dismissed by some as exaggeration, yet repeated reports over decades confirmed that the Silver Pit was not merely an ordinary trench, and whispers grew among mariners that its very presence altered the character of the sea above it. Geologists have proposed various origins, from the scouring action of retreating glaciers to meteorite impacts, yet no single explanation fully accounts for its size, shape, and geological anomalies. Glacial theory suggests ice movement carved out the depression, but the pit's irregular contours and sediment composition challenge that idea. The meteor impact hypothesis is intriguing, particularly given the depth and sudden drop-off, yet no definitive crater-like features or impact debris have been conclusively identified. Subsurface instability or ancient river channels drowned by rising sea levels may also have contributed, but the combination of factors remains speculative. The ambiguity lingers, leaving a lingering tension between observable data and the sense that the trench may conceal forces beyond current understanding. Local fishing practices have long been affected, with nets snagged in ways that seem to follow invisible underwater contours, and some ships navigating the area report unexpected sonar readings that baffle even experienced captains. The pit appears to alter local acoustics, creating echoes and sound distortions that complicate sonar interpretation. Fishermen describe odd movements of schools of fish, as if the trench exerts influence even on marine life, diverting shoals and affecting catches in unpredictable ways. Navigating the Silver Pit requires both skill and respect, with mariners learning to anticipate subtle anomalies that could spell disaster if ignored, a reminder that the trench commands attention in ways that cannot be measured fully. Modern surveys employing sonar mapping and sediment core sampling have revealed layers of sand, silt and clay, yet the deeper structure and the forces that created it remain difficult to interpret. Some cores show signs of sudden sediment deposition, while others suggest long-term erosion, hinting at a tumultuous and possibly violent past. Mapping the trench has revealed smaller depressions and channels within the main pit, creating a labyrinthine feature that defies simple description. Each new survey uncovers additional questions: why these patterns formed, how stable the pit is over decades, and whether undiscovered anomalies lie even deeper, perhaps preserving events that predate human observation entirely. Some researchers speculate that the pit may be connected to ancient North Sea landscapes, hinting at submerged valleys or coastlines that disappeared beneath rising waters thousands of years ago. During the last ice age, sea levels were significantly lower, exposing land now buried beneath the North Sea, and some believe the Silver Pit may mark a remnant of river valleys or coastal depressions from that period. Evidence of fluvial sediments supports this idea, though the exact relationship remains unproven. The thought that the pit may preserve traces of landscapes lost to the sea adds a layer of historical intrigue to its already mysterious presence, suggesting that secrets older than recorded history may lie hidden within its depths. Currents swirl unpredictably within the depression, creating eddies and whirlpools that make navigation tricky, while the deeper waters appear almost unnaturally still, lending the pit an eerie and otherworldly presence. Mariners report that vessels can experience sudden shifts in speed or drift when entering the trench, as if invisible forces tug at hulls and keels. The interplay of shallow surrounding areas and deep central waters generates pressure differentials that are difficult to model, further complicating efforts to understand the pit. These natural phenomena amplify the mystery, suggesting that the trench possesses both subtle and powerful effects that extend beyond what is immediately visible, as though the sea itself keeps watch over what lies beneath. When compared to other known trenches in the North Sea and similar formations worldwide, the Silver Pit stands out for its combination of depth, sudden drop-off, and historical uncertainty about its creation. Other depressions are more gradual, better documented, or clearly linked to known geological processes, yet the Silver Pit resists such categorization. Its anomalies persist despite decades of study, and each new observation seems to deepen the puzzle rather than resolve it. The North Sea holds many secrets, but few have sparked the same enduring fascination among scientists and mariners as this enigmatic trench, whose presence is both tangible and unsettling. Despite decades of research and technological advances, scientific debate continues, with new data raising as many questions as it resolves, leaving the pit's precise origins shrouded in ambiguity. Research vessels continue to map their depths, while sedimentologists analyze layers for clues to past events, yet no definitive narrative has emerged. The pit is a reminder that even in an era of advanced oceanography, natural formations can remain resistant to human understanding. Each discovery highlights both progress in knowledge and the enduring power of nature to confound even the most sophisticated analyses, hinting that some truths may lie permanently beyond human reach. Today, the Silver Pit draws geologists, historians, and curious sailors alike, each hoping to uncover some hint of its past, yet the sea keeps its secrets well, revealing only fragments of the story it has held for millennia. Some dive into its waters for direct exploration, while others study historical records, sonar maps, and sediment cores from afar, piecing together incomplete narratives. The trench continues to inspire fascination precisely because it defies final explanation, a persistent enigma that challenges assumptions about the North Sea, its history, and the forces that shaped it, leaving observers to wonder what remains invisible just below the surface. The Silver Pit lies untouched and unexplained, a silent scar in the North Sea whose secrets continue to defy every effort to uncover them. The Dogger Bank incident of 1904. Thick fog hung over the Dogger Bank, and the waters carried an uneasy stillness that belied the chaos about to unfold when Russian warships suddenly loomed on the horizon. The sea seemed heavier than usual, and the soft roar of distant waves masked a sense of impending danger that neither the fishermen nor the naval crews fully anticipated. The small trawlers, bobbing gently in the grey swell, were ordinary vessels engaged in routine work, yet their presence would soon be misread with catastrophic consequences. Overhead, the sky pressed down like a low ceiling, muffling sounds and turning the horizon into a blurred line where reality and threat were nearly indistinguishable. Fishermen navigating the shallow sandbanks felt the sea shift in ways they could not explain, each ripple seeming to foreshadow the unexpected danger that approached silently beneath the mist. Nets swung lazily from the decks, and the scent of salt and cod mingled with the faint tang of coal smoke from nearby steamers. The North Sea was alive with its usual rhythms, yet every slight change in the current or wind direction became magnified, feeding unease among men accustomed to its unpredictability. Something intangible hovered in the cold air, a tension that would only escalate when the looming ships revealed themselves as more than a distant silhouette. The massive outlines of the Russian Baltic fleet emerged from the haze, their decks lined with anxious sailors scanning the horizon, unaware that their next shots would be aimed at innocent vessels. The fleet's officers moved with precision, yet the fog blurred their perception, and the crew, already on high alert due to fears of Japanese torpedo boats during the Russo-Japanese War, misinterpreted the small trawlers as a threat. Guns were loaded, and crews tensed, the mechanical clatter of preparation punctuating the eerie quiet of the North Sea. The scale of the ships dwarfed the fishing vessels, yet the mistake would make the smaller boats the unintended centre of an international incident. Gunfire erupted without warning, splashing into the water around trawlers and sending men scrambling as panic tore through the fog-obscured scene, leaving a surreal impression of a battle without clear enemies. Splinters of wood flew, ropes snapped, and shouts were swallowed almost immediately by the low-hanging mist. The fishermen attempted to signal their innocence, waving arms and flags, but the distance, the fog, and the fear on the fleet's decks rendered all efforts meaningless. The sudden violence transformed the once familiar sea into a theatre of uncertainty, where sound, sight, and scale were distorted, and the smallest movements could be mistaken for hostile action. Fishermen later recalled the terror: broken nets, overturned small boats, and men clinging desperately to rigging, while the sound of cannon fire echoed across the deceptive calm of the North Sea. Their accounts describe a world in which the ordinary became extraordinary, where minutes stretched into a haze of fear, uncertainty, and confusion. Every wave appeared both protective and threatening, lifting boats only to toss them unpredictably. Time itself seemed suspended as the line between life and catastrophe narrowed, underscoring the precariousness of being human amidst the raw power of nature, amplified by misjudged human intent. Though no lives were lost, the suddenness of the attack left physical and psychological scars as the fleet disappeared back into the mist and the waters returned to an almost unnatural serenity. Debris drifted across the surface, silent evidence of the encounter, while crews on both sides were left to process what had occurred. The North Sea had absorbed the conflict and released it, leaving witnesses with shock, relief, and lingering questions about how easily routine activity could spiral into violence. The fleet's retreat did little to ease the unease. The invisible boundaries of safety had been tested, revealing the fine line between order and chaos on these grey waters. Diplomatic cables raced between London, St. Petersburg, and Tokyo, revealing confusion on every level and exposing the precariousness of human judgment when the sea amplifies miscommunication and uncertainty. Political officials sought explanations, while naval authorities defended their actions as precautionary, citing intelligence reports, war fears, and operational confusion. Journalists chronicled the event with a mix of incredulity and fascination, emphasizing the fragile nature of human perception in the face of the sea's vastness. What could have become a catastrophic international incident was narrowly contained, yet the questions of how and why persisted in offices, newspapers, and maritime circles across Europe. Naval historians have argued for decades over the incident's causes, examining signalling errors, poor visibility, and misperceived threats, yet the precise combination of factors remains an unresolved enigma. Even with access to fleet logs, testimonies, and official reports, scholars struggle to reconcile human intent with the unpredictable effects of weather, light, and distance. Modern interpretations emphasize the role of the sea itself in amplifying uncertainty, suggesting that the North Sea, with its deceptive calm and sudden turbulence, functions almost as a character in the story, one that influences events without conscious intent. The North Sea itself seemed to participate in the deception, with shifting tides, treacherous sandbanks, and fog that obscured reality, making ordinary manoeuvres appear threatening and magnifying human error into near disaster. Currents could carry ships unpredictably, obscuring visual signals, while low-lying waves blended with the mist to distort perception. Even experienced sailors described the encounter as surreal, their familiarity with the waters offering little guidance when ordinary patterns were rendered unfamiliar by the interplay of fog, human fear, and naval misjudgment. The sea, in its vast indifference, had created an environment where mistakes could escalate into crisis with astonishing speed. Later accounts described the Dogger Bank incident as a harrowing mixture of fear and absurdity, where routine fishing suddenly became a test of instinct, resolve, and luck under circumstances no one could fully control. Memoirs, letters, and official statements all convey the same tension, a moment when humans were caught between the pressures of international conflict and the unpredictable behaviour of a natural environment that amplified every misstep. Historians note that the incident could have easily led to war, yet it remains a story of near misses, misperception, and the subtle power of the North Sea to influence human events in ways that defy simple explanation. Even over a century later, the tale resonates because it illustrates how fragile human perception is at sea, and how easily misunderstanding, fear, and the mercurial waters of the North Sea can collide. Scholars, sailors, and casual observers alike continue to study the incident for its lessons, fascinated by the blend of human error, environmental unpredictability, and historical context. The Dogger Bank incident remains a unique example of how ordinary activities, fishing, navigation, and naval patrol, can converge with extraordinary consequences when uncertainty, geography, and human psychology intersect in a vast, indifferent sea. The Dogger Bank incident remains a shadowed lesson in uncertainty, a moment when the North Sea transformed ordinary labour into an extraordinary encounter that no one could fully explain. The lost submarine U31. A cold, steel-grey horizon stretched endlessly as U31 slipped quietly into the North Sea, its mission routine, but the waters below harboured dangers no crew could fully anticipate. The submarine, one of Germany's early U31 class, had completed numerous patrols without incident, yet the North Sea remained a treacherous environment even for experienced crews. Mist and fog blurred visibility, while sudden squalls and shifting currents created hazards that could turn routine manoeuvres into deadly errors. Observers on nearby ships reported calm seas, but beneath the surface, invisible forces moved unpredictably, leaving the submarine's path vulnerable to misfortune. Each dive carried a sense of both confidence and caution, a delicate balance between human skill and the sea's unpredictable power. Within the submarine's cramped hull, 23 men moved in careful coordination, monitoring gauges and valves, aware that a single error could bring disaster in the silent depths. Every member of the crew had undergone rigorous training, yet confined space magnified the tension of every movement and sound. Torpedoes were primed, ballast tanks adjusted, and engines hummed with low, constant vibration. The men relied on one another, their actions precise and deliberate, each aware that even minor miscalculations could have catastrophic consequences. Silence inside the vessel was punctuated only by mechanical clicks and the subtle hiss of compressed air, a quiet reminder of the ocean's pressure bearing down on them. Above, the North Sea shifted unpredictably, with rogue waves and hidden sandbanks forcing constant vigilance, while dense fog obscured landmarks and threatened to disorient even seasoned navigators. Currents twisted in unexpected directions, and the seabed was dotted with treacherous features capable of ensnaring vessels unaware of their presence. Even the most advanced charts of the era offered incomplete guidance, and while U31 was equipped for underwater navigation, the combination of environmental hazards and wartime urgency made every mile potentially lethal. The crew understood that beneath the calm surface, the sea could become a merciless force, indifferent to human plans or protocols. The ongoing conflict added pressure. Mines, enemy patrols, and warships increased the likelihood that any minor miscalculation could escalate into catastrophe. The First World War had made the North Sea a theatre of constant vigilance, where every vessel, civilian or military, was at risk. Mines could lie hidden for months, and patrols of destroyers and cruisers often moved unpredictably. U31 was aware that even a minor misjudgment, an unnoticed obstacle, a misread signal could trigger disaster. Each dive carried not only the technical risk of deep-sea operation, but also the strategic dangers of an active war zone. The crew's discipline was critical, yet the sea and war both conspired to create uncertainty at every turn. Signals from U31 were sparse, the last signals hinting only at its position before it disappeared, leaving historians with fragments of information and an impenetrable mystery. Radio technology of the time was limited, and once submerged, the submarine could only transmit briefly using primitive wireless sets. Reports show that the vessel was last observed near the Doggerbank area, but subsequent communications never arrived. This gap in information has fueled decades of speculation, as the exact moment and cause of the submarine's disappearance remain unknown. The silence following the last transmission would grow into a historical puzzle, emblematic of the North Sea's ability to absorb secrets without a trace. No alarms were sent, and within hours the submarine had vanished from all observation, swallowed by the sea's vast grey expanse and leaving nothing but speculation behind. Surface ships reported no wreckage, no floating debris, and no survivors. A disappearance that defied the expectations of naval officers accustomed to partial accounts or survivors of maritime accidents. The lack of evidence made the loss both inexplicable and haunting, suggesting that the North Sea had claimed the vessel in a manner that erased nearly all signs of its fate. The crew's experience, the vessel's design, and the careful procedures followed all seemed irrelevant once the sea intervened. Search teams combed the area using dragging nets and early sonar technology, but U31 remained invisible, as if the North Sea had deliberately erased all traces of its presence. Ships crisscrossed the waters for days, conducting systematic sweeps and charting the seabed, yet the submarine's remains were never located. The search expanded to surrounding areas as currents and tidal shifts were calculated, but the results were the same. Nothing. This absence of physical evidence only deepened the mystery, suggesting that either nature or wartime misfortune had conspired to conceal the submarine completely. Scholars have debated countless theories: mechanical failure, collisions with mines, or sudden structural collapse, yet none account fully for the total disappearance of the vessel and its crew. Some argue that a catastrophic failure of the pressure hull could have led to a rapid descent, leaving no opportunity for emergency signalling. Others suggest that floating mines, common in the North Sea during wartime, could have struck unexpectedly. There are even theories that navigational errors brought the vessel into a sandbank or hidden trench, where it was irretrievably lost. Each hypothesis contributes a piece to the puzzle, yet no single theory satisfies the enduring enigma. The North Sea itself became a silent participant, its powerful currents, low visibility, and shifting seabeds capable of concealing even a submarine from sight for decades. Underwater conditions, combined with wartime activity, meant that a vessel like U31 could vanish almost without leaving a trace. Layers of silt, the force of tides, and the natural concealment provided by seabed contours all contributed to the impossibility of immediate recovery. Even in modern times, when sonar mapping and deep-sea exploration have revealed many lost wrecks, U31 remains elusive, a stark reminder of the ocean's dominance over human endeavour. U31's disappearance affected naval strategy, submarine construction, and safety protocols, leaving a legacy that merges human ingenuity with the uncontrollable forces of nature. Lessons learned from the event influenced hull design, compartmentalization, and emergency procedures for submarines in subsequent decades. Naval engineers studied the incident carefully, analysing risks inherent in underwater operations, while commanders reassessed the balance between stealth, depth, and survivability. Despite these improvements, the North Sea continued to assert its mysterious power, demonstrating that even technological advances cannot fully overcome the hazards hidden in its grey shifting waters. Despite modern deep-sea mapping and advanced submersibles, definitive evidence of U31's fate remains elusive, heightening its aura as one of the North Sea's enduring enigmas. Expeditions to locate the submarine have produced inconclusive results, with sonar anomalies and debris fields failing to provide confirmation. Historians, marine archaeologists, and enthusiasts continue to search, guided by charts, currents, and fragmentary records, yet the vessel remains lost. Its absence reinforces the North Sea's reputation as a place where mysteries persist. where human skill meets nature's indifference, and where some stories remain untold, suspended in time beneath the waves. Somewhere in its cold, watery grave, U31 continues to guard the secrets of the North Sea, its silence a haunting echo of a vanished crew and their unanswered fate. The Heligoland Bight naval battles. The roar of naval guns shattered the North Sea's surface, as fleets clashed in a theatre where confusion and unseen dangers ruled every manoeuvre. The Heligoland Bight, a wide curve of water near the German coast, had become a deadly arena in the early months of World War I. British cruisers and destroyers had been dispatched to challenge German patrols, yet the engagement quickly spiralled beyond control. Waves churned under the weight of armoured vessels, smoke and shellfire obscured sightlines, and the chaos of battle left sailors and officers alike unsure of what had just occurred. Reports would later reveal gaps and contradictions that only deepened the mystery surrounding the clash. Steel hulls cut through choppy waves, and sailors gripped rails and valves, aware that a single miscalculation could doom both vessel and crew. Every turn of a wheel, every adjustment of a gun, carried the weight of life and death. Officers relayed orders across the decks while lookouts scanned for enemy ships, their eyes straining through smoke and spray. On board, the vibration of engines and the reverberation of distant explosions created a constant undercurrent of tension. Despite rigorous training, even experienced crews found themselves navigating not only enemy fire, but the unpredictable temperament of the North Sea itself. Currents shifted abruptly around hidden sandbanks, forcing captains to make split-second decisions that could spell disaster even without enemy fire. Charts were incomplete, and water levels fluctuated in ways that made known hazards suddenly invisible. Ships manoeuvred in tight formations, attempting to maintain distance from the treacherous seabed while simultaneously evading artillery. The constant push and pull of the waves required intuition, timing, and luck. The North Sea was as much a participant in the battle as any vessel or sailor. One misjudged drift could strand a ship or expose it to an enemy salvo. Shellfire lit the horizon in bursts of orange and black, creating chaos as men struggled to identify targets and avoid friendly vessels in the melee. Smoke mingled with spray, and each explosion sounded closer than it might have been. Sailors feared the invisible arc of shells they could not anticipate, and officers struggled to issue commands over the din. In the uncertainty, mistakes were inevitable. Ships moved erratically, some too aggressively, others too cautiously, and every decision had consequences that could unfold within seconds. The violent interplay of human action and the North Sea's unpredictability heightened the danger of every moment. Signals blinked inconsistently, lanterns swayed, and misread commands caused near collisions, leaving some ships dangerously out of formation and exposed. Signal flags, semaphores, and early wireless systems were unreliable amid smoke and wind. Crews could only guess whether an order had been received correctly or if a command had been misinterpreted. Moments of hesitation or misunderstanding created gaps that enemy fire exploited instantly. In some cases, vessels nearly rammed each other or had to abruptly adjust course to avoid disaster. The technical limitations of communication in the early 20th century, combined with environmental conditions, amplified the confusion exponentially. Several vessels were struck and disappeared from view, their destruction confirmed only by the distant cries of survivors and the wreckage that drifted on the water. Some men clung to debris for hours, watching plumes of black smoke rise where their comrades' ships had once been. Others were pulled under by waves before help could arrive. The exact number of casualties remained uncertain for days, as reports conflicted and some vessels were reported missing only later. The speed at which ships could vanish in the fog, smoke, and swell of battle underscored the perilous nature of naval warfare in the North Sea. Floating debris and broken masts marked the sea like scars, while entire warships seemed to vanish without explanation, swallowed by both the battle and the currents. Wooden lifeboats, lifebelts, and scattered supplies drifted for miles, offering clues to what had occurred yet never painting the full picture. Even vessels that survived sustained structural damage from which some never fully recovered. The ocean's currents carried evidence away from the scene, dispersing fragments over vast distances. Each piece of wreckage hinted at events no single survivor could recount completely, leaving historians and witnesses alike to interpret a puzzle without a complete frame. Official logs contained contradictions, and officer reports clashed with each other, forcing historians to rely on fragments of memory and secondary accounts to to piece together the day. One commander might describe advancing cautiously, while another insisted they had been ordered forward. Casualties and ship losses were sometimes counted twice, or overlooked entirely in the fog of war. The combination of chaotic engagement, poor visibility and high-pressure decision-making meant that no single record captured the battle accurately. Over time, researchers would attempt to reconstruct the sequence of events, only to encounter gaps that the North Sea itself seemed determined to preserve. Naval analysts suggest errors in judgment, hidden sandbanks, and sudden squalls contributed to the losses, yet no single explanation accounts for all the ships that vanished or were damaged. The battle was as much a test of environmental awareness as of tactical skill. Captains had to anticipate both enemy action and the sea's hidden dangers simultaneously. Even minor miscalculations could result in catastrophe, and the interplay of human error, mechanical failure, and natural hazards created an unpredictable outcome. Scholars continue to debate which factors were decisive and which were merely compounding circumstances. The North Sea's temperament magnified every human mistake, its shifting tides and submerged hazards turning ordinary manoeuvres into deadly gambles for fleets on both sides. Waves twisted ships unexpectedly, obscured ranges and deflected shells, leaving both attackers and defenders vulnerable. Tides moved swiftly around sandbanks, sometimes carrying wreckage into new locations that misled observers. The environment was an active participant, shaping events as much as strategy or skill. Sailors who survived recounted moments of near-miss collisions, sudden changes in course, and the unsettling sense that the ocean itself was unpredictable and almost sentient in its power. Eyewitness accounts remained scattered and conflicting, leaving much of the battle shrouded in uncertainty and the fate of some vessels forever unresolved. Some sailors remembered advancing aggressively, others recalled being held back, and the truth likely lies somewhere in the overlapping chaos of these perspectives. Families received partial or incorrect reports, while historians later struggled to reconcile the many versions of the battle. In the end, the Heligoland Bight remains emblematic of a war fought under conditions that obscured clarity, leaving lingering questions about what actually transpired in those crucial hours of conflict. The Heligoland Bight continues to hide the full story of that day, a collision of human strategy and the North Sea's unforgiving power that no record has yet fully revealed. The St. Romanus disappearance. The St. Romanus steamed steadily through the northern waters, carrying cargo and a crew who had grown accustomed to the North Sea's unpredictable temperament. The vessel, a British cargo steamer, was tasked with routine transport between ports, yet the sea it traversed was anything but predictable. Waves rose and fell with a subtle menace, and the wind could shift from calm to tempestuous in moments. Sailors who'd faced rough weather for years could feel unease in the air, a tension that hinted at dangers hidden beneath the surface. Shadows of distant clouds and the faint creak of the ship's timbers seemed to whisper of unseen threats. This voyage, ordinary in its schedule, would become extraordinary in its mystery. Messages relayed by neighbouring vessels hinted at unusual conditions, with radio operators noting a silence that would soon be alarming. Initial communications from the St. Romanus were normal, confirming its position and progress. Yet, as hours passed, attempts to establish contact yielded no response, unusual for a ship operating in heavily trafficked waters. Coastal stations monitored the steamer's expected trajectory, and nearby ships scanned the horizon for a sign of its passage. Each unanswered signal increased concern, and the absence of any distress call began to suggest that something beyond ordinary delay had occurred. The silence itself seemed to weigh upon those listening, a palpable tension that hinted at a fate beyond human comprehension. Engineers laboured below decks, monitoring pressure gauges and coal-fed boilers, while officers on the bridge maintained precise courses that could easily be disrupted by the sea's hidden dangers. The vessel's machinery was typical of the era, reliable but vulnerable to sudden mechanical failure. Crews worked in near silence at times, aware that any error could escalate into catastrophe. The bridge crew relied on compasses and charts, yet magnetic anomalies and shifting sandbanks posed risks that even careful navigation could not always prevent. The North Sea demanded constant vigilance, and for the men aboard the St. Romanus, each decision carried weighty consequences. Whispers of past maritime tragedies seemed to linger in the air, like echoes of vanished ships. Observers in distant ports recorded the vessel's absence with unease, piecing together the last known sightings into a timeline that seemed increasingly incomplete. Harbour officials and shipping companies noted the steamer's delayed arrival and compared its schedule against other traffic. Logs from other ships in the vicinity indicated nothing extraordinary in the hours leading up to the disappearance, leaving only the silence and a growing sense of foreboding. Merchants, families, and maritime authorities watched anxiously, struggling to reconcile the ship's failure to arrive with the otherwise routine conditions reported earlier. Murmurs spread among dock workers, tales of ghostly ships appearing and vanishing adding to the air of dread. The North Sea itself bore an ominous presence, with currents shifting abruptly, hidden shoals threatening the hull, and sudden gusts challenging the vessel's steady progress. The region is notorious for sandbanks that appear and disappear with tides, capable of grounding even experienced mariners. Sudden squalls and rogue waves could strike without warning, leaving vessels vulnerable in an instant. The unpredictable interplay of wind, wave, and current creates conditions that test both human skill and the integrity of a ship's structure. In this environment, the seemingly ordinary voyage of the St. Romanus became fraught with peril, even before any mechanical or human error. A sense of the sea's immense power pressed upon every report and observation, as if nature itself was concealing the ship's fate. Authorities dispatched patrols and organised search efforts, scanning the expanse where the ship was last reported, yet no wreckage surfaced to confirm its fate. Naval and merchant vessels combed the area meticulously, following both the projected path and drift patterns of currents. Aircraft reconnaissance, though limited at the time, supplemented surface searches, yet the North Sea refused to reveal any trace. The absence of debris, lifeboats, or identifiable wreckage deepened the mystery, leaving maritime officials with no tangible evidence to indicate what had happened. Each search returned empty-handed, as though the sea had swallowed the St. Romanus whole, leaving only speculation behind. Eyewitness reports varied, some claiming fleeting glimpses of the ship through haze, while others only spotted debris carried far from the expected course, deepening the uncertainty. Fishermen and passing sailors offered fragmented accounts, often contradictory, of sightings near shifting sandbanks. Some described the steamer as moving normally, while others claimed it had appeared partially obscured by mist, as if swallowed by the sea itself. The inconsistency of these accounts complicated investigations, leaving historians to weigh each report carefully and recognize that the truth might lie beyond observation or human perception. Shadows, glimmers, and fleeting silhouettes haunted memory and record alike, enhancing the eerie quality of the mystery. Mechanical failure and navigational error were plausible explanations, yet inspections of sister ships and historical records revealed no recurring defects, leaving investigators with more questions than answers. The St. Romanus had been maintained to contemporary standards, and no prior incidents suggested catastrophic structural weaknesses. Navigational tools were accurate, and the crew was experienced. Nevertheless, the ship vanished without warning or explanation. Even the possibility of collision with another vessel was discounted due to the lack of corroborating evidence. Every logical hypothesis uncovered more uncertainties than it resolved, making the silence of the sea seem deliberate, almost sentient. Some theorists speculated that extraordinary natural phenomena, rogue waves, shifting sandbanks, or sudden storms, may have overwhelmed the steamer in a matter of minutes. The North Sea is known for violent, localized events capable of destroying unprepared ships almost instantly. Rogue waves can rise unexpectedly, dwarfing a vessel and leaving no survivors. Sandbanks and underwater topography can deflect currents, creating turbulence that challenges even the most skillful navigation. While none of these explanations can be confirmed in the absence of physical evidence, they remain consistent with what is known about the region's hazards and the sudden disappearance of a single vessel. The sea's vastness and unpredictability seem to mock human attempts to understand its secrets. Investigators and maritime historians continue to retrace routes, examine scattered reports, and evaluate environmental conditions, yet the North Sea has kept its secrets well guarded. Detailed reconstructions using historical charts, weather data, and accounts from other ships yield partial insights, but the full story remains obscured. Modern sonar surveys have located many shipwrecks across the North Sea, yet no definitive trace of the St. Romanus has surfaced. The combination of a vast maritime expanse, shifting currents, and a lack of tangible wreckage ensures that the case remains unresolved, a haunting enigma for those who study it. Each year brings new analyses, yet the answers remain as elusive as the horizon itself. The haunting absence of survivors, combined with the silence of the North Sea, left families and historians alike grasping at fragments of a story that refused to be told fully. Personal letters and company records provide glimpses of the ship's final voyage, but these are overshadowed by the empty sea that has concealed all other answers. Every speculation is tempered by the knowledge that human understanding of maritime hazards, particularly in the early 20th century, was limited. The St. Romanus stands as a reminder of the sea's unpredictable power and the thin line between routine transport and sudden disappearance. The chilling quiet that followed its vanishing continues to reverberate through maritime lore. The North Sea keeps the fate of the St. Romanus hidden, a silent witness to a disappearance that no record or search has ever fully explained. The Texel Uprising and sunken dead. Tensions simmered across the decks of the ships moored near Texel, where whispers of revolt intertwined with the briny scent of the North Sea. The year was 1917, and the war had stretched the patience of sailors to its limit. Crowded quarters, long hours, and inadequate provisions had eroded discipline, while political ideas circulating from port to port had begun to take hold among the men. Officers moved along the decks cautiously, aware that the usual deference of their crew had shifted into quiet resentment. Overhead, gulls wheeled against a grey sky, indifferent to the human struggle unfolding below, and the wind carried a chill that hinted at the dangers the sea itself could impose. Crew members, drawn from disparate ports and backgrounds, carried grievances long nurtured by the pressures of war and the monotony of naval life. Many had been pressed into service, compelled by duty or conscription, and the relentless North Sea offered little reprieve. Letters from home described hardship, rumours circulated of soldiers striking back on shore, and men aboard these vessels began to whisper of taking matters into their own hands. Even minor injustices, delayed rations, unfair punishment, or the constant drilling demanded by commanding officers, seemed amplified by the claustrophobic conditions of the ships. Friction built not only between rank and file but among sailors themselves, dividing loyalty and suspicion along invisible lines. A small act of defiance, a refusal to obey orders, ignited suspicion and fear, rippling through the vessel like a warning undercurrent. A sailor hesitated, delaying the raising of a signal, and the officer's glare was met with quiet muttering and deflected gazes. Such gestures, minor on their own, carried enormous weight aboard ships already strained by tension. Other crew members began to mirror the hesitation, intentionally slowing work or ignoring commands. The officers, accustomed to compliance, were unprepared for coordinated insubordination. Below decks, the clatter of machinery seemed louder against the uneasy silence, and every footstep above echoed with the unspoken question of who might resist next. Commands were shouted into the wind, but authority faltered as officers confronted unexpected resistance from those sworn to follow. Orders to set sail or adjust course were met with hesitation, sometimes outright refusal, as sailors weighed obedience against their growing fear and anger. The officers attempted to assert control, moving swiftly along the deck, yet their presence could not undo the momentum of collective unrest. Voices rose, men argued over duties, and the usual rhythm of the ship was replaced with a dissonant chaos. The North Sea, vast and unyielding, seemed to mirror this turmoil, waves striking the hull with indifferent force, reminding all aboard of the fragility of both life and authority. Cold waves lapped relentlessly against the hulls, concealing any evidence of casualties while amplifying the sense of isolation and peril. Men who slipped or were knocked into the water by accident or conflict vanished quickly, swept away by currents that showed no mercy. Life jackets offered minimal protection, and lifeboats, if deployed hastily, risked capsizing. The sea's grey expanse stretched endlessly, reflecting both the despair and the defiance of the crew. Even the sound of splintered wood or shouted commands seemed muted beneath the roaring waves. Every action carried the potential for fatal consequence, and the knowledge that the sea could claim its own at any moment intensified the mutinous tension. Panic coursed through the remaining crew, each sailor navigating not only the mutiny's chaos, but the North Sea's indifferent expanse. Fear of both reprisal and drowning propelled some to attempt rash interventions, while others froze, paralysed by the impossibility of predicting what would happen next. Shadows of comrades lost below deck or overboard haunted those left standing, and the cold, salt-slicked wind made even simple movements an effort. Conversations fractured into whispers, and loyalty became impossible to gauge. Every glance carried suspicion, and every misstep risked escalation, leaving the crew teetering between survival, rebellion, and the unknowable power of the surrounding waters. Efforts to regain control faltered, sending confusion cascading through the ranks as miscommunication turned small errors into life-threatening dangers. Officers attempted to issue clear commands, but words were lost over wind and surf, misinterpreted or ignored by terrified sailors. Boatswain's signals went unheeded, and the coordinated work necessary to keep the vessels safe began to collapse. Amid this breakdown, accidents occurred. Ropes snapped, cargo shifted, and hatches slammed shut unexpectedly. Each event fed the cycle of chaos, reinforcing the sense that the uprising and the sea were conjoined in their threat. Even experienced sailors found themselves disoriented, unable to anticipate the unpredictable combination of human defiance and maritime hazard. By dawn, the aftermath of revolt was stark. Some ships abandoned, bodies lost to the sea, and a landscape marked by both human failure and natural indifference. Survivors recounted glimpses of comrades swallowed by waves or swept overboard during moments of disorder. Logs, if preserved at all, recorded only fragmented events, with gaps that could never fully be reconciled. The cold morning light revealed decks strewn with the evidence of confrontation, upturned benches, scattered equipment, and personal belongings floating or lodged in the rigging. The North Sea, with its grey expanse, had consumed more than men. It had absorbed history itself, leaving behind traces that hinted at tragedy without confirming it. Reports and logs offered fragmentary glimpses of the uprising, leaving gaps that would fuel speculation and historical inquiry for decades. Naval authorities pieced together accounts from surviving crew, distant observers, and coastal stations, yet contradictions abounded. Some claimed widespread rebellion, while others suggested only isolated incidents of disobedience. Bodies were recovered sporadically, yet the majority were never found, disappearing beneath tides that concealed more than they revealed. Each account deepened the mystery, providing tantalizing clues without resolution. The interplay of human conflict and maritime violence created a puzzle in which the North Sea remained an unyielding participant, shaping both the story and its lingering uncertainty. Subsequent investigations and memorials attempted to reconcile what was known with what remained hidden beneath waves that refused to surrender their secrets. Commemorative plaques and naval records documented the known losses, but they could not account for every missing sailor. Scholars and historians have tried to reconstruct the sequence of events, yet the ever-changing currents and shifting sands of the North Sea make it impossible to verify many details. Oral histories, letters, and second-hand accounts preserve the human element of fear and courage, yet they leave a haunting question: how much of the uprising's truth lies permanently submerged? The sea, as both witness and actor, withheld its full story. The North Sea's ceaseless currents carried the memory of revolt and the vanished alike, a quiet testament to human frailty and maritime mystery. Sailors who survived carried scars, physical, emotional, and moral, while the lost became part of the sea's enduring enigma. Each voyage across the region recalls the Texel Uprising, reminding crews of the fragile boundary between obedience and chaos. Scholars, divers, and maritime enthusiasts continue to search for remnants, hoping to connect fragments of history to tangible evidence, yet the majority of secrets remain protected by the cold, vast waters. The uprising's resonance persists, not only as a historical event but as a lingering whisper in the North Sea's ceaseless rhythm. The waters around Texel hold the uprising's hidden truths, preserving the fate of the mutinous and the lost beyond any ledger or witness. The North Sea flood of 1953. The night air carried a strange electric chill as winds from the North Sea began to sweep inland, foreshadowing a disaster few could have anticipated. Across the coasts of the Netherlands, England, and Belgium, residents noticed the early swell of tides that no ordinary weather seemed capable of producing. Radio reports hinted at a storm building far out at sea, but few could grasp the scale of what was approaching. Low-lying villages reliant on centuries-old dikes and embankments were particularly vulnerable, and by midnight the first ominous sounds of water lapping against barriers began to pierce the quiet night. People awoke to uneasy murmurs of neighbours, the air heavy with salt and apprehension. Dikes and levees, long thought sufficient to hold back the relentless tides, stood under growing pressure, creaking and bending as the storm surged. Many were poorly maintained after years of wear and wartime neglect, their structures vulnerable to erosion. In some places, sandbags had been hastily stacked in the days prior, but they offered little resistance against the rising sea. Engineers and local authorities had warned of extreme weather, yet the combination of a high spring tide with gale-force winds created a scenario beyond the imagination of most. Along the Dutch coast, farmers peered across the fields, noting with unease that their dikes were being tested against the North Sea's raw power. Across the coastlines of the Netherlands, England and Belgium, water levels rose with a speed that defied human calculation, swallowing harbours and low-lying villages alike. Entire streets disappeared under foaming waves. Docks and piers vanished into the darkness, and small fishing communities found themselves surrounded. The roar of the sea was constant, a living, unyielding sound that drowned out shouts and alarms. Lights flickered and went out as power lines collapsed beneath the storm, leaving towns in disorienting darkness while waves tore through homes and businesses. Many who had ventured out to inspect the flood's progress were forced back by the sheer force of wind and water, sometimes swept off footpaths and into the abyss. Residents awoke to the ominous sound of waves crashing against their doors, the sea advancing like a living force indifferent to their cries. In a matter of hours, streets became rivers, and ground floors were inundated with water cold enough to numb even the bravest. Children clung to their parents, pets whimpered in confusion, and the elderly were evacuated with great difficulty. Boats became the only possible means of travel, yet they were few, and currents made navigation perilous. Each creaking wall and splintering beam added to the suspense, the unpredictability of the North Sea turning ordinary houses into fragile islands of temporary refuge. Families scrambled to higher ground, carrying children, livestock, and whatever possessions could be salvaged before the waters claimed the streets and farmlands. Some fled with blankets wrapped around their shoulders, others with only the clothes they had on, the urgency of survival leaving no time for deliberation. Horses and cows were moved to drier pastures if possible, but for many, even animals could not escape the flood's grasp. Roads were impassable, communication lines destroyed, and those attempting to signal for help relied on the faint glimmer of distant lanterns or the hope of seeing a passing boat. The sense of helplessness was pervasive, as families realized they were at the mercy of both storm and sea. Entire neighborhoods disappeared beneath the churning waves, leaving only the occasional roof or treetop as grim markers of what had once been. Towns such as Zuid-Beveland and parts of Lincolnshire were submerged, streets replaced by a chaotic mixture of mud, debris and seawater. The North Sea's encroachment was swift and merciless, erasing familiar landmarks and disorienting those who had survived the initial surge. Residents who attempted to navigate their flooded streets found themselves in dangerous undertows, swept along by currents capable of dragging even the strongest swimmers into the depths. In these moments, the line between survival and disappearance was extraordinarily thin. The North Sea seemed to consume not only the land but also memory itself, erasing paths, fences, and landmarks that generations had relied upon. Historical features once used for navigation were submerged, leaving people and authorities unable to rely on traditional markers for guidance. Even maps became less useful, as the landscape was altered overnight. Eyewitness accounts later spoke of entire farms vanishing, fields flattened by relentless waves, and the eerie silence after the water receded that contrasted with the chaos of the night before. What remained was a new terrain shaped by nature, with only traces hinting at what had been lost. Rescue boats battled the surging currents, their crews risking everything to reach stranded survivors whose fates hung precariously in the storm's grip. Volunteers and official rescue teams worked through nightmarish conditions, rowing or navigating motorboats over debris-filled waters. Many were successful in saving lives, but others were overwhelmed by the speed and strength of the flood. In some cases, entire families were recovered just before they were swept into deeper channels, while others were never seen again. Heroism and tragedy existed side by side, each amplified by the North Sea's indifference to human endeavour. In the aftermath, mud and debris told fragments of the night's horror, yet the sea retained countless secrets, including those who vanished without a trace. Bodies were recovered along the coast, but many were carried into deeper waters, leaving families with uncertainty and unresolved grief. Fields once full of crops were now barren swamps, and the destruction of infrastructure delayed the return of normal life. Oral accounts preserved stories of those who clung to rooftops for hours, of strangers helping neighbours escape, and of the moments when the water inexplicably paused, giving brief reprieves to the terrified. Yet the full scope of human loss and the sea's hidden toll could never be fully documented. Stories persisted of individuals swept out to sea who were never accounted for, and of entire families whose disappearance remained an unresolved mystery even years later. Even decades after the event, local historians and survivors spoke of unusual sightings, fleeting signals of life among debris, or items washing ashore without their owners. Such fragments fueled speculation and haunting legends, contributing to the North Sea's reputation as both a giver and taker of life. Despite meticulous record-keeping, the flood left an indelible gap between the known and the unknown, reinforcing the sea's capacity for concealment. The landscape itself bore the scars of the flood, reshaping coastlines, drowning fields, and leaving witnesses haunted by what they had barely survived. Dikes were rebuilt, villages reconstructed, and memorials erected to honour the lost, yet the imprint of the night lingered. Survivors described the eeriness of walking along changed fields, recognising traces of their homes or barns that no longer existed. Even the strongest structures could not resist the sea entirely, and the memory of the flood became embedded in both collective history and personal trauma. It was a reminder that the North Sea could erase human effort as effortlessly as it shaped it. The North Sea carries the secrets of that fateful night, its waves hiding the vanished and whispering their stories to anyone who dares to listen. The mystery of the schooner Zabrina. The schooner Zabrina was last seen gliding through the grey expanse of the North Sea, her sails taut and crew attentive, yet no one aboard would ever reach port. Weather records from the time indicate unusually strong westerly winds that battered the eastern English coastline, though nothing in the report suggested a storm severe enough to sink a vessel of her size. Despite the conditions, the crew remained confident, steering through the choppy swells with a practiced skill, unaware that their journey would be swallowed by an enigma that would haunt mariners for decades. Built for endurance and long-haul trading, the Zabrina had a reputation among mariners for resilience, making her sudden disappearance all the more confounding. She was a two-masted schooner of modest tonnage, nimble yet robust, capable of weathering the unpredictable North Sea like few other merchant vessels of her era. Her reputation extended beyond technical design. Local pilots recalled her voyages as smooth and uneventful, a testimony to her seasoned captain's navigation and her sturdy construction. To vanish so completely without a trace seemed almost impossible, stirring a quiet dread among sailors who respected the North Sea's unforgiving temperament. On her final voyage, the vessel carried a modest cargo of coal and provisions, steered by an experienced captain familiar with the treacherous waters off the eastern coast. The crew consisted of a handful of hands who had sailed with him for years, each skilled in maintaining the ship under shifting tides and sudden squalls. They departed from Great Yarmouth, bound for Hamburg, following a well-trodden route that mariners had navigated countless times before. Nothing in their plans suggested peril. Their charts, compass readings, and experience left no immediate reason for concern, yet the sea that had carried them safely so often would soon become an impenetrable veil. Reports began trickling in when the schooner failed to arrive as scheduled, sparking concern among shipping officers and local families who depended on her safe return. The delay was not extraordinary at first. The North Sea was known for erratic currents that could postpone even the most diligent voyages. But days passed without a word, signals went unanswered, and anxious inquiries to nearby ports yielded no sightings. Rumours circulated of miscommunication or a minor grounding along the shoals, yet the absence of the Zabrina soon became a mystery that authorities could not ignore. Search parties braved the North Sea's shifting currents and churning waves, combing the waters with little more than hope and scant evidence of where the Zabrina might have gone. Small lifeboats and coastal cutters scoured the presumed route of her passage, scanning the horizon for wreckage or survivors. Reports of fleeting silhouettes on fog-laden mornings sparked brief excitement, only to vanish as quickly as they appeared. Every sweep of the North Sea seemed to reinforce its uncanny capacity to erase, leaving searchers grappling with the silence of a sea that yielded no answers and hinted at its own inscrutable will. Fragments of the ship were later discovered, including a single lifebuoy and a section of rigging, yet these remnants offered no clear indication of the vessel's final fate. The lifebuoy, bearing the schooner's name in faded lettering, was found washed ashore near a small fishing village, yet it provided no clues as to whether the crew had been lost at sea, swept from the deck by a sudden wave, or drifted to some unrecorded port. The rigging, tangled and torn, suggested strain and possible panic, but it was insufficient to reconstruct the events of that final voyage. The sea had returned only fragments, keeping the larger story concealed. Mariners whispered of ghostly sightings, faint sails in fog, unidentifiable lights on the horizon, and speculated whether the North Sea itself had claimed the schooner as its own. Coastal fishermen spoke of strange bells ringing through the mist, of shadows crossing the water where no ship should be, of whispers in the wind that carried no discernible source. These accounts were dismissed by authorities as superstition or mistaken observation, yet they persisted among those whose lives were intertwined with the sea. The legend of the Zabrina grew in parallel with her factual disappearance, a haunting echo of a vessel that seemed to straddle the line between reality and apparition. Families waited in anxious silence, watching the horizon and praying for word, while communities along the coast tried to reconcile with the possibility that the entire crew might be gone. Letters written in hope went unanswered, and days stretched into weeks without communication. The emotional toll was compounded by the uncertainty that hung like fog over every shore-facing window, every lighthouse beam scanning the waves in vain. The North Sea had claimed more than a vessel. It had absorbed certainty itself, leaving only the anxious tension of loved ones awaiting a return that would never come. Subsequent investigations scoured shipping logs, weather reports and eyewitness accounts, uncovering hints but ultimately providing no concrete explanation for the vessel's vanishing. Every charted course and recorded tide was meticulously examined, from the coastal sandbanks to the open waters where currents collided in unpredictable ways. Nothing accounted for the schooner's disappearance. Officials considered collisions with floating debris, unrecorded storms or navigational miscalculations, yet none fit the known facts. The absence of survivors, the minimal wreckage, and the lack of conclusive evidence left the incident classified as one of the North Sea's most confounding maritime mysteries. The sea, ever capricious and unyielding, seemed to erase both the Zabrina and the memory of her presence, leaving only questions that lingered like fog over the waters. Mariners recognized the North Sea's mercurial temperament, a body of water capable of violent transformation without warning, capable of both sustaining life and swallowing it silently. That very duality contributed to the mystique surrounding the schooner's fate. Despite exhaustive records and theories, the water itself seemed to resist clarity, cloaking the final moments of the Zabrina in an ambiguity that modern researchers still find difficult to penetrate. Generations of sailors and researchers have since pondered the schooner's disappearance, piecing together fragments of evidence while the North Sea holds its silence. The story of the Zabrina continues to be cited in maritime studies, ghost ship accounts and historical reviews, its absence a benchmark for unexplained vanishings. Even modern sonar and underwater exploration have failed to locate her remains, suggesting either that she rests in a forgotten trench or that the sea has claimed her in ways impossible to trace. Each generation returns to her tale, compelled by the lure of unanswered questions and the chilling reminder that the North Sea often preserves its secrets indefinitely. The Zabrina drifts in legend and speculation, a vessel suspended between reality and phantom, her fate entwined with the restless tides and inscrutable depths of the North Sea. The Skagerrak submarine graveyard. Beneath the restless waves of the Skagerrak, dozens of submarines lie undisturbed, their hulls corroding in silence while the current sweeps secrets across the seabed. The channel, connecting the North Sea to the Baltic, is deceptively narrow, yet its waters have claimed countless vessels over the decades. Among the wrecks, some were German U-boats lost during World War I and II, while others were Allied submarines caught in mines or torpedoes. Divers and researchers describe the area as almost otherworldly, where ghostly shapes of rusted conning towers emerge in sonar readings before vanishing again into darkness, leaving only questions. The sheer density of wrecks gives the Skagerrak a reputation as one of Europe's most enigmatic submarine graveyards. During the two world wars, the narrow waters between Denmark, Norway and Sweden became a theatre of underwater strategy, yet many submarines vanished without a trace, leaving only sparse logs and unanswered signals. Naval patrols crisscrossed the strait, laying mines and monitoring enemy movements, but the chaotic currents often swept vessels off their plotted courses. Records note sudden disappearances during routine exercises, with entire crews lost and no wreckage ever recovered. Even official investigations acknowledged that the sea itself acted as an unpredictable participant in these operations, shifting wrecks and erasing evidence in ways that left historians puzzled decades later. Among the lost vessels, some were never found despite careful tracking, their last transmissions hinting at routine patrols that abruptly ended, swallowed by the unforgiving North Sea. U-boat logs occasionally recorded innocuous sightings or minor mechanical issues, yet the messages stopped mid-sentence, a chilling silence that echoed over naval headquarters. Attempts to triangulate the final positions of missing submarines often produced conflicting results, sometimes suggesting the vessels had drifted into international waters or collided with mines that were never charted. For families and commanders alike, the lack of closure intensified the mystery, leaving the North Sea as an enduring enigma, capable of absorbing human error and wartime chaos alike. The Skagerrak is deceptively treacherous, with shifting depths, submerged ridges, and strong tidal currents that conceal wrecks and confound even experienced surveyors attempting to map the area. Hydrographic charts reveal sudden drops and sandbanks that create unpredictable underwater currents, which can carry vessels off course or obscure their remains entirely. Salvage teams have noted that sonar readings often appear distorted as metallic structures blend with natural seabed formations, giving the illusion of motion or false wreck locations. Even modern mapping technologies struggle with the constantly shifting topography, making each expedition a delicate combination of science and intuition. Post-war naval investigations and salvage missions revealed fragments of some submarines, yet the majority remained elusive, with sonar readings offering tantalizing shapes that dissolve into darkness before identification is possible. In 1946, for instance, British divers explored a suspected wreck, finding twisted metal and personal effects but no conclusive evidence of which vessel it belonged to. Similar discoveries occurred in subsequent decades, with metal conning towers and periscopes protruding from sandbanks only to vanish again after storms. Each discovery confirmed that submarines rested beneath the waves, yet left the broader questions: why they sank, how, and whether their crews had any chance of survival, unanswered. In a handful of cases, vessels were discovered resting at impossible angles, as though some unseen force had thrust them into final positions that defied explanation, deepening the enigma surrounding their loss. One U-boat was found on its side, partially buried in soft sediment, with evidence suggesting a violent collapse within the pressure hull. Another appeared at a near vertical angle, its stern jutting into the water column like a monument to some silent catastrophe. Naval engineers examined these wrecks and could not determine whether structural failure, collisions, or powerful underwater currents caused such unusual orientations, leaving the mysteries intact. Fishermen navigating the waters over these graveyards report sudden snags on unseen objects, their nets catching on nothing solid, creating stories of ghostly encounters that ripple through local ports. Tales circulate of lines being shredded in moments, equipment breaking for no apparent reason, and the sensation of enormous forms lurking beneath the surface. While some attribute these experiences to debris or shifting sand, others believe the lost submarines themselves continue to haunt the Skagerrak, their presence influencing the currents and tides in subtle, almost imperceptible ways. Mariners remain wary, respecting the hidden dangers beneath waters that seem calm but conceal lethal iron relics. Sailors and naval historians whisper of eerie sightings and unexplained acoustic signals, suggesting that the Skagerrak's submerged fleet continues to communicate with those daring enough to probe its depths. Some have reported hearing ghostly sonar echoes or mechanical creaks that cannot be traced to active vessels, as if the submarines themselves are speaking from their watery graves. Investigators are careful not to attribute these anomalies to folklore alone, as underwater acoustics can be unpredictable in this region, yet the coincidences are unnerving. The haunting silence above contrasts sharply with the hidden, restless activity below, leaving the impression that the graveyard is far from inert. Theories abound regarding why some submarines disappeared entirely, ranging from mechanical failure and collisions with mines to navigational errors amplified by unpredictable currents, yet none fully account for the full extent of the losses. Experts suggest combinations of factors: wartime urgency forcing vessels into dangerous passages, sudden storms, and human error exacerbated by poor visibility and magnetic anomalies. Some wrecks show signs of mine detonation or structural collapse, while others display no external damage at all, raising questions about the limits of our understanding. The patterns are incomplete, leaving historians and oceanographers to piece together fragmented evidence into plausible but never certain explanations. Modern explorations employing remotely operated vehicles and advanced sonar mapping have revealed detailed wreck layouts, yet each discovery only raises further questions about how these vessels met their fates in the silent deep. High-definition imagery now shows rusted torpedo tubes, collapsed control rooms, and scattered personal belongings, frozen in time on the seabed. Archaeologists and naval historians study these images to reconstruct final missions, but currents and sediment often obscure decisive details. Even the most sophisticated equipment cannot fully penetrate the mystery, emphasizing that the North Sea keeps its secrets well, allowing only glimpses of the tragic narratives below. Time has turned the Skagerrak into a repository of mystery, where steel coffins and rusted remnants lie undisturbed, a chilling reminder of the sea's capacity to both preserve and conceal human endeavours. Every expedition confirms that these submarines are more than relics. They are markers of loss, cautionary tales of human ambition against a vast, unrelenting ocean. The graveyard remains dynamic, as storms shift wrecks, reveal fragments, or conceal entire vessels, keeping the region enigmatic and perpetually dangerous. Even decades after their sinking, these submarines continue to shape maritime operations and capture the imaginations of those who study the North Sea's depths. The Skagerrak's submerged sentinels endure, a fleet of vanished souls and twisted steel that continues to guard its secrets beneath the unyielding waves. The lost aircraft over the North Sea. The sea that breaks against the shores of Scotland and Scandinavia is often grey and churning, but on one clear autumn morning a small aircraft vanished without a trace somewhere over the deep, unforgiving waters of the North Sea. A German-registered Cessna 172 left Uetersen-Heist airfield with a solitary pilot bound for a visit to relatives in Bavaria, a routine journey that should have taken it well inland. Instead, the aircraft turned northwest after takeoff, heading far out over the North Sea toward the Shetland Islands, a course that confounded air traffic controllers as contact was lost entirely about 6 hours later, leaving only radar echoes and unanswered questions. Investigators later noted that the pilot had requested a plane equipped with autopilot, a choice that now sits at the heart of unresolved inquiries about human decision and the unforgiving reach of sea and sky. More than a year after the disappearance, a trawler pulled in a twisted, waterlogged section of fuselage far from the expected flight path, revealing wreckage and human remains, tangible proof of a loss that had existed only in silence and speculation. Even with the physical evidence, the reasons behind the deviation, the final course of the aircraft, and the last moments of the pilot's life remain cloaked in mystery, leaving experts and families alike to confront the harsh reality of the North Sea's unpredictable nature. Above these same waters, other aircraft have vanished under far different circumstances. In 2020, an F-15C fighter jet from the United States Air Force disappeared during a routine patrol, triggering immediate search and rescue operations. The powerful McDonnell Douglas Eagle, capable of rapid ascent and equipped with sophisticated radar, was last seen 75 nautical miles from the Yorkshire coast, yet despite helicopters, vessels and surveillance aircraft combing the area, neither jet nor pilot was ever recovered. Official accounts acknowledge the disappearance but provide few answers, leaving the incident as a stark reminder of how quickly the sea can erase both man and machine from the record. The radar blips vanish, the radio calls fade, and the North Sea returns to its indifferent churn, holding its secrets out of reach even for the most advanced technology. Long before these modern losses, the North Sea had already claimed numerous aircraft, some eventually discovered, others swallowed without a trace. In February 1950, a Douglas C-47, a Skytrain operating out of Amsterdam on a cargo flight toward London, suddenly went out of control and plunged into the sea, leaving 7 crewmen lost with no wreckage recovered. In the years following World War II, other aircraft, including Vickers Wellingtons and Avro Ansons on training or reconnaissance missions, similarly vanished without explanation. Their final paths were obscured by stormy seas and shifting currents, and search and rescue efforts were ultimately abandoned, leaving behind only unanswered questions about mechanical failure, navigational error, or the unpredictable nature of these cold, expansive waters. The North Sea's environment magnifies every small miscalculation. Sudden storms, dense fog, and icy gusts of wind can turn a routine flight into a deadly struggle, and currents can carry wreckage far from the point of impact, burying it beneath layers of shifting sand and silt. Pilots navigating over these waters may never appreciate the full danger below until it is too late, and for those on shore, the first hint of trouble is often simply the loss of contact, a disappearing radar blip, and the silence that follows. In many cases, aircraft are eventually classified as lost, leaving families and authorities with only hypotheses and a haunting void where answers should be. The recovery of the 2023 Cessna brought a rare sense of closure in one sense, yet it also deepened the mystery. The wreckage revealed the final resting place and offered clues, but investigators still struggle to answer why the pilot veered so far off course. Did weather conditions suddenly deteriorate, forcing a fatal descent? Did mechanical failure play a role, or did something unexplainable occur in the last hours? Forensic analysis of the fuselage and flight path continues, yet no sequence of events fully accounts for the plane's journey over those isolated, unforgiving waters. The North Sea has proven itself uniquely merciless in aviation history. Unlike the Bermuda Triangle or remote stretches of ocean, aircraft can disappear here near established flight corridors, often in plain view of commercial or military traffic, and yet vanish entirely within moments. Deep-sea terrain, shifting sandbanks, and the relentless motion of waves mean that many wrecks are never recovered, their existence recorded only in historical logs and witness accounts. Even when debris is discovered, the precise circumstances of loss are often impossible to reconstruct fully, leaving only fragments of metal and memory as evidence of tragedy. Families of lost pilots face a bitter mixture of relief and frustration. When wreckage surfaces, it provides tangible proof of fate, yet it rarely explains the full story. Human remains bring closure in the most fundamental sense, yet the questions of choice, timing, and circumstance remain. Each recovery underscores the sea's indifference, reminding investigators and loved ones that, even as they search for answers, the waters retain authority over what is revealed and what remains hidden. The North Sea has claimed not only small private planes and fighter jets, but also larger military transports and reconnaissance aircraft. Each loss contributes to a long, haunting pattern of disappearances that challenges even experienced investigators who must piece together incomplete flight data, weather reports, and fragmented wreckage. Many cases are complicated by the isolation of crash sites, the rapidity of accidents, and the sheer scale of the ocean, all of which conspire to obscure final truths in a cold grey expanse. Even when aircraft are eventually located, the circumstances surrounding their loss continue to intrigue and perplex. Structural damage, evidence of human error, or the impact of storms can offer partial explanations, but rarely a complete narrative. Each discovery sparks renewed debate over the limits of aviation safety, the hazards of human decision-making in isolated conditions, and the capacity of the North Sea to erase entire journeys without warning. In this way, history and memory are intertwined with speculation, forming a tapestry of mystery above waters that give nothing easily. Investigators also consider patterns that might link individual losses across decades. Aircraft may vanish under similar meteorological conditions or along comparable flight paths, suggesting that environmental hazards play a larger role than previously understood. However, each case contains its own distinct circumstances, variations in aircraft type, pilot experience, and mission objectives, meaning that the North Sea refuses to provide a single explanation for its record of disappearances. The unpredictability of waves and wind, combined with human error and mechanical failure, creates an ongoing challenge for those who seek to understand the losses. The North Sea's capacity for erasure is almost absolute. It absorbs radar signals, hides wreckage beneath layers of sediment, and leaves families and investigators in a state of perpetual uncertainty. Even when portions of aircraft reappear after months or years, the sea's story is never complete, offering only fragments of the truth and allowing speculation to fill the void. The ocean keeps its secrets in a way that is both maddening and awe-inspiring, a reminder of the vastness and power that dominate this northern expanse. And somewhere far below the shifting currents, another lost aircraft waits in silence, its story still unwritten. The Brent Spar controversy. Brent Spar rose from the waves as a towering industrial monument, a steel platform whose presence would ignite one of the most intense environmental debates of the 1990s. For years, it had functioned silently, storing tens of thousands of barrels of crude oil extracted from the Brent oil field, its massive columns engineered to endure conditions that would challenge smaller platforms and ordinary vessels alike. Few who passed the structure could imagine the storm of controversy it would provoke, nor the questions that would linger beneath its rusting steel and in the minds of those who debated its fate. From the first proposal to remove it, the platform became both a symbol of industrial ambition and a lightning rod for ecological concern, drawing attention far beyond the North Sea. Engineers built the buoy with exacting precision, measuring every tank, girder and weld to withstand the harsh northern storms that could sweep across the oil field. Its steel skeleton was designed to survive pounding waves and violent winds, a human-made colossus meant to endure the harshest conditions nature could deliver. Beneath the surface, enormous ballast tanks and structural supports extended deep into the seabed, stabilizing the platform and anchoring its presence in one of Europe's busiest and most challenging offshore regions. For decades, it operated without incident, a silent witness to the extraction of vast quantities of oil and the steady march of industrial expansion in a region shaped by both commerce and climate. When Shell proposed sinking the platform in 1995, alarms spread quickly among environmental groups and scientists, who questioned the wisdom of abandoning such a massive structure in the deep ocean. Concerns centered on what residual oil, lubricants and metals might remain trapped in its tanks and steel, posing risks to marine life far from the platform's footprint. Critics argued that sinking the structure could create a slow-release hazard, contaminating ecosystems with substances that would persist for decades. Shell maintained that the deep-sea disposal plan was the most economical and technically feasible option, but their assurances only heightened suspicion, turning the proposal into a test of public trust in corporate and governmental judgment. Activists sailed directly to Brent Spar, positioning themselves against the towering structure, with banners snapping in the wind and waves breaking against hulls. Greenpeace led the charge, filming confrontations with crews and documenting every action for global broadcast. The images of protesters in inflatable boats juxtaposed against the massive steel buoy captured the world's imagination, framing the industrial object as both a technical marvel and a moral dilemma. International attention surged as debates moved from conference rooms to news headlines, highlighting not only the potential environmental impact, but also the growing tension between industrial decision-making and public accountability. Independent surveys only deepened the mystery. Teams tasked with assessing the seabed's condition produced conflicting results. Some concluded that the structure posed minimal ecological risk, while others warned of contamination with oil residues and heavy metals that could affect marine ecosystems for years. Reports of leaks and residual hydrocarbons were often contradicted by visual inspections and measurements taken during removal planning. This uncertainty amplified the sense of suspense surrounding Brent Spar, leaving policymakers and the public alike uncertain whether its final resting place would be a negligible footprint on the ocean floor or a slowly unfolding hazard. The dismantling process was a technical spectacle in itself. Massive sections of steel were cut with precision and transported on specialized vessels for removal and recycling on shore. Portions left behind, however, sank slowly into the contours of the seabed, partially embedded in sediment and obscured by currents and shifting sandbanks. These remnants, unmonitored and largely inaccessible, became a source of speculation. How much oil remained within? Were metals leaching into the surrounding waters? The seabed preserved its secrets, silently documenting each phase of human intervention while leaving investigators with more questions than answers. Even after removal, environmental concerns persisted. Currents carried traces of oil and metallic residues far from the structure, prompting scientists to conduct long-term monitoring of marine life and water quality. Fish and invertebrate populations were observed for subtle changes, and sediment samples were analysed for signs of contamination. Yet the results were never entirely conclusive. While some areas appeared unaffected, others showed anomalies that could not be easily explained, fueling debate over whether the North Sea had absorbed the platform without consequence, or whether it had retained a hidden imprint of industrial activity. International maritime regulations added another layer of ambiguity. Responsibility for the platform's disposal lay at the intersection of national jurisdiction, corporate interests, and European oversight, leaving questions unresolved about accountability for the portions left behind. Some argued that Shell bore full responsibility for environmental impacts, while others noted that governments had approved the disposal method and set the legal framework for monitoring. This overlap created a complex web of legal and regulatory uncertainty, reinforcing the sense that Brent Spar's true impact could never be definitively determined. Even decades later, rumours and speculation persisted. Fishermen and divers occasionally reported unusual currents, strange metallic readings, or oddly behaving sediment around the remaining sections. These observations, anecdotal though they were, contributed to a lingering aura of uncertainty. What exactly lay hidden beneath the surface? Could there be unforeseen chemical reactions, structural collapses, or ecological effects that would only reveal themselves over time? The combination of technical complexity, environmental concern, and inaccessible remnants ensured that Brent Spar remained a focus of both fascination and worry. The slow corrosion of steel offered a stark reminder of the tension between human construction and natural forces. Saltwater, wind, and shifting tides gradually eroded exposed surfaces, demonstrating that even enormous platforms are temporary when faced with persistent environmental pressures. Time reshaped the structure, softening edges, collapsing support beams, and subtly altering the footprint it left on the seabed. While human engineering had created a symbol of control and precision, nature's patient and persistent forces quietly reasserted dominance over every inch of steel and sediment. Sections left partially embedded after dismantling continued to generate quiet speculation, visible only to those who approached with instruments, diving gear, or scientific equipment. Their position, largely uncharted and unmonitored, transformed them into silent witnesses to the debates, compromises, and conflicts that had determined the platform's fate. The physical remnants of Brent Spar seemed to hold memory of the protests, of the surveys, of every disagreement over what could or should have been left in the depths. Even as the platform faded from headlines, its story continued underwater, part engineering artifact, part environmental riddle. The removal, the protests, and the scientific investigations were only one layer of a narrative that extended into the sediment and currents, a story whose final chapters remained unwritten. Beneath layers of sediment and unpredictable currents, Brent Spar holds secrets that no survey or scrutiny has yet revealed. The disappearance of the FV Lorela and Rodrigo. Snow-driven gusts tore across the Arctic North Sea fishing grounds in 1959, marking the final voyage of two trawlers that would vanish without a trace. The grey horizon seemed endless, a cold, unyielding expanse where ice and wind could turn routine work into a struggle for survival. The Lorela and Rodrigo had set out like any other vessels on a midwinter trawl, their holds prepared to receive the season's catch, yet the ocean that had sustained countless fishermen suddenly became a stage for the inexplicable. From their departure, a tension quietly gathered in the air, unnoticed by those on shore, until the moment when both ships simply ceased to exist in the world of the living. Each vessel carried a tightly knit crew of seasoned fishermen, men familiar with harsh northern waters, yet no amount of experience could fully shield them from the sudden ferocity of Arctic storms. The Lorella's 22 crew members were spread across decks and cabins, tending nets and machinery, while the Rodrigo's smaller team of 18 moved with practice coordination through icy decks slick with spray. These men had faced freezing temperatures, heavy seas, and the ever-present threat of ice. Yet even their vigilance could not compensate for the hidden dangers that would confront them on this unforgiving stretch of water. That winter, storms churned with unusual ferocity, and shifting ice floes made navigation treacherous. Reports from nearby vessels described waves higher than anticipated, and currents that changed direction with bewildering speed. Fishermen spoke of sudden squalls that could appear without warning, icing decks and equipment, creating lethal conditions in mere minutes. The combination of violent weather, freezing temperatures, and unstable ice meant that even a small misstep or mechanical failure could become catastrophic, a reality that the crews of the Lorela and Rodrigo would confront in ways no one anticipated. The Lorela and Rodrigo slipped from port under grey skies, their captains plotting familiar courses across waters they had traversed countless times. The early hours were ordinary, with the wind at their backs and nets cast in anticipation of a steady haul. Yet the North Sea, cold and indifferent, held its secrets well, and the routine of departure offered no hint of the peril lurking ahead. By mid-morning, the first unusual swells began to test the trawler's stability, but the men remained focused, unaware that the conditions they faced would soon escalate beyond control. Early radio messages confirmed progress and typical catches, routine exchanges that reassured those on shore. But over time, updates grew sporadic, brevity replacing detail. Captains reported stronger winds and occasional ice accumulation, yet nothing signalled immediate danger. Then, as if the ocean had closed a silent lid, all communication ceased. No alarms were triggered, no distress calls sent. The ships vanished from the network, leaving only empty airwaves and growing concern among colleagues and family members waiting at distant ports. Nearby vessels and aerial patrols immediately began searching, scanning with binoculars, searchlights, and the limited radar technology of the day. The wind and waves, however, rendered each search increasingly desperate. Crews combed for hours, then days, battling freezing spray and fatigue, aware that time was the most unforgiving element of all. Each day without contact deepened uncertainty, as hope and dread mingled over decks slick with ice, and the ocean swallowed clues as efficiently as it could have swallowed the vessels themselves. Fragments of timber and a single life ring eventually floated to the surface, evidence that something catastrophic had occurred. Scattered equipment, nets, and crates were later recovered, but no hulls or crew members ever appeared. Each floating remnant hinted at sudden disruption, suggesting that the trawlers had not simply drifted apart or grounded on unseen shoals, but met a more immediate and violent fate. Even these scraps could not provide certainty, leaving investigators and fellow fishermen with the haunting question of what had transpired in the open water. Maritime analysts considered a range of possibilities: sudden capsizing due to rogue waves, mechanical failure under extreme strain, or collisions with drifting ice. Yet none of these theories fully accounted for the simultaneous disappearance of two separate vessels. No eyewitnesses survived to provide testimony, and the absence of definitive wreckage meant that each explanation carried significant gaps. The North Sea had claimed its victims quietly, leaving only speculation, and the mystery deepened as the community sought answers that remained out of reach. The human toll resonated far beyond the decks of the lost trawlers. Families and fellow fishermen faced the uncertainty of vanished loved ones, their imaginations filled with the possibilities of tragedy. Obituaries and newspaper reports recorded the loss, yet could capture neither the scale of despair nor the eerie silence left in the ship's wake. Stories of the disappearances circulated in ports for decades, becoming a cautionary tale about the fragility of human endeavour in the face of a powerful and unpredictable environment. Sailors spoke in hushed tones of rogue waves that could sweep across decks, shifting currents that could pull vessels under, and mechanical failures that could strike without warning. Yet no single factor explained the complete disappearance of both the Lorela and Rodrigo. Each hypothesis illuminated part of the truth while leaving another part shrouded in uncertainty, a reminder that the North Sea's dangers were multifaceted and often invisible until it was too late. The Arctic waters held their silence, leaving only empty waves and drifting ice as witnesses to human vulnerability. Currents continued to move undisturbed over the site of the vanishings, carrying traces of what had occurred but leaving no definitive answers. The sea's persistence contrasted sharply with human efforts to record, recover and understand, a testament to forces far older and more merciless than any vessel or crew. Time passed, yet the memory of the Lorela and Rodrigo lingered in stories, maritime records, and the uneasy imagination of those who knew the sea's power. Occasionally, fishermen reported glimpses of nets or masts briefly breaking the surface, as if the trawlers were stirring just out of reach, teasing a truth that the waters refused to reveal. The Lorela and Rodrigo remain concealed in the icy depths, their final journey recorded only in currents and in the unanswered questions that continue to haunt those who study the North Sea. The German high seas, fleet scuttling echoes. June 21, 1919 transformed Scapa Flow from a harbour into a graveyard as the German high seas fleet slipped beneath the waves in an act of deliberate destruction. The sun rose over Orkney with a muted light that failed to touch the gravity of what was about to unfold. Ships that had once symbolised power and national pride were quietly being claimed by the North Sea. For the crews carrying out the scuttling, each action was calculated, almost ritualistic, a statement of defiance against the victors of a war that had reshaped Europe. Even decades later, the echoes of that day remain, hidden in the depths and in the treacherous waters above. The fleet consisted of battleships, cruisers and destroyers, hulking instruments of war whose presence alone had once demanded the attention of the Allied navies. Each vessel represented the peak of German naval engineering, a floating combination of steel, firepower and human effort. From the massive battleships like the Kaiser class to nimble torpedo-armed destroyers, the fleet had been a formidable deterrent in wartime, yet now lay idle, interned and vulnerable. The sheer number and scale of the ships meant that what happened next would not only shock naval strategists, but also create a lasting danger in these waters. Months of tense negotiations and mistrust had left German officers and Allied commanders locked in a silent struggle, each manoeuvring for leverage while the war's shadows lingered. Interned at Scapa Flow under strict supervision, the German crews lived with uncertainty and resentment. They monitored Allied activity, understanding that any misstep could invite confrontation or prevent their chance for autonomy. Political tension blended with human pride, and a subtle, almost invisible thread of anticipation wound through the harbour, foreshadowing the dramatic events that would soon occur. At dawn, crews methodically opened sea valves and detonated charges, a calculated orchestration that sent steel giants to the seabed with a haunting finality. The ships listed and sank at precise intervals, controlled chaos that masked panic beneath routine. Officers had been given orders to prevent the fleet from falling intact into Allied hands, yet they carried out the scuttling with an eerie calm, almost as if the act had been rehearsed. The water swallowed entire decks, gun turrets and cabins, and the North Sea received them without protest, quiet as a crypt. News of the mass scuttling spread in waves of disbelief, as officials realised the harbour was now a labyrinth of sunken ships, each a floating testament to defiance and risk. Allied commanders were stunned that the German crews had succeeded so completely, leaving only partial wrecks and floating debris for examination. The harbour, once a controlled staging ground, now become a danger zone, with wreckage threatening navigation, exercises, and even the salvage operations that would follow. The scale of the destruction and the boldness of its execution left a lingering impression of the fleet's power, even in its absence. For decades, mariners had to navigate carefully around hidden masts and submerged hulls, aware that a single miscalculation could tear apart hulls or snag vital equipment. Even modern charts carried warnings of these hazards, and the knowledge of unexplored or partially submerged wrecks created tension among fishermen and naval crews. Unseen obstructions could shift in storms or spring from maps that were outdated, leaving those on deck aware that the past still held authority over the present. The North Sea, once again, proved that history could directly shape human peril. Salvage crews returned repeatedly over the years, hauling valuable metal and machinery from the sunken vessels, yet scores of ships were left untouched, their secrets preserved by cold, dark waters. Steel hulls and artillery were recovered for scrap, and sometimes entire superstructures were raised for examination. but the majority remained, sitting in quiet suspense. The lingering presence of these ships reminded everyone that not all consequences of war were immediate. Some extended far beyond treaties and headlines, lying hidden for decades beneath an indifferent surface. Divers and researchers in recent decades have glimpsed cabins, artillery and personal effects, but each dive uncovers as many questions as it answers, leaving the fleet's full story incomplete. Personal items, logbooks and machinery offer tantalizing hints about life aboard the vessels, the hurried scuttling and the human element of this naval drama. Yet each discovery also reinforces the sense of unknowability, as entire sections of wrecks remain unexplored, obscured by sediment, darkness or dangerous currents. The fleet exists as both artifact and enigma, bridging human history and natural mystery. The remaining wrecks now pose ecological and legal puzzles, with governments weighing preservation against maritime safety, while unexploded ordnance lingers as a silent hazard. Environmental scientists worry about rusting metal, oil residues and the slow leaching of chemicals from the ships into the water. Legal authorities debate ownership, responsibility and access rights, creating a layered tangle of regulation above a layer of steel, sediment and shadow. The North Sea continues to demand respect, as centuries-old acts of defiance remain as relevant to modern policy as they are to history. Locals tell of ghostly lights and strange echoes in the harbour, and the sunken ships have seeped into maritime lore, a reminder that history can haunt even the stillest waters. Fishermen speak cautiously of strange sounds, sudden shifts in currents, and occasional debris rising unpredictably to the surface. Legends grow with each retelling, blending fact and imagination, but always maintaining a kernel of truth. The sunken fleet is a presence, silent but perceptible, that refuses to be fully understood or ignored. The North Sea preserves these remnants in quiet depth, a tableau of steel and shadow that bridges human ambition and the relentless pull of the ocean. Time has softened the immediate drama, but it has not erased the danger or the mystery. Currents continue to shift around the sunken hulls, storms disturb their sedimented surroundings, and unknown sections remain unexplored, leaving a mixture of historical record and unanswered questions that stretch into the present. Each dive, each expedition, encounters fragments of the past, yet the fleet's full story remains tantalizingly out of reach. Long after the war ended, the sunken fleet waits in silence, holding secrets that no historian, diver or salvage crew has yet brought fully to light. The Amoko Cadiz North Sea impact. The coastline of Brittany bore the brunt of a disaster that spilled hundreds of thousands of tons of crude oil into waters stretching far beyond human observation. What began as a maritime transport operation quickly transformed into a catastrophe, as a single vessel, massive in scale, became a conduit for industrial misfortune. While the immediate wreck demanded attention from emergency crews and local authorities, the spill's effects were far from contained, flowing outward along currents and touching regions only indirectly connected to the initial site. For the North Sea, these distant waters represented the unknown consequences of a disaster that had already stunned the world. The Amoko Cadiz was a colossal supertanker, its steel hull carrying a cargo of crude whose scale magnified the consequences of a single miscalculation at sea. Each compartment held thousands of tons of petroleum, the collective mass a potent force against which no immediate human intervention could fully contend. As the vessel moved along the French coast, the precariousness of its route became evident in the churning waves and narrow passages of the Atlantic, where geography and weather conspired against even the most careful navigation. The combination of human engineering and natural power would collide with devastating effect. Relentless storms battered the vessel, tearing open its structure and releasing a black tide that crept insidiously along coasts and currents alike. Waves ripped at the hull, stripping metal from the deck and forcing the cargo into open water. The oil spread in ribbons across the surface, invisible in its vastness and yet unmistakable wherever it touched land. The sight of contaminated rocks, marinas, and beaches became a stark measure of human vulnerability, an enduring image of a maritime landscape suddenly turned hostile. The disaster was as much a product of nature as of human design. Currents carried microscopic droplets northward, weaving them into channels that eventually touched waters connected to the North Sea, leaving trails only partially visible to observers. Oceanographers and maritime authorities were quick to track the main spill, but the smaller, dispersed droplets travelled far beyond immediate monitoring. The North Sea, though distant, lay within the broader network of currents and tides, and it became a quiet repository for unseen impacts. Ships sailing these waters would later encounter traces, reminders of a catastrophe that had been physically distant but ecologically inseparable from their domain. Beaches were coated in oil, seabirds fell lifeless into the surf, and local fisheries faced disruption, while much of the spill's reach remained unquantified and unseen. Residents and fishermen confronted immediate consequences: fouled nets, contaminated catches, and the stench of crude on every exposed surface. Yet the majority of the disaster remained hidden below the waves, a creeping, persistent presence that would resist precise measurement. The visible damage was only a fraction of the spill's total effect, and the invisible currents carried uncertainties as relentlessly as the oil itself. Sediments trapped residual oil beneath layers of sand and silt, creating contamination that resisted cleanup and confounded initial ecological assessments. The residue lingered in seabeds, settling in crevices, estuaries, and tidal flats where sunlight could not reach and human oversight was limited. Tiny traces persisted for months, sometimes years, influencing the growth of algae, the reproduction of fish, and the overall health of the marine ecosystem. The North Sea's connectivity meant that these hidden deposits were not confined to Brittany alone. They were part of a wider, largely unseen environmental web. Emergency crews battled the relentless forces of wind and tide, deploying skimmers, booms, and dispersants, yet the oil persisted, slipping through human control like a shadow. Efforts to contain the spill met constant resistance from waves, currents, and sudden shifts in weather. Each intervention captured a portion of the crude, but vast quantities eluded collection, leaving the oil to drift into areas beyond immediate concern. The mismatch between human intervention and natural persistence underscored a deeper lesson about scale, resilience, and the limitations of technology in the face of environmental power. Maritime studies tracing current patterns and sediment samples have found lingering residues far from the spill site, evidence of a disaster whose full extent is still only partially known. Analysts and oceanographers pieced together data from decades of monitoring, using chemical markers and flow models to map the dispersal. What emerged was a portrait of ongoing subtle impact, traces of oil in unexpected locations, persistent contamination beneath the waves, and a story that could not be fully told by surface observation alone. Even in regions connected indirectly to the spill, the legacy remained visible to those who looked carefully. Fishing communities reported diminished catches and unusual residues, and shipping companies encountered unexpected traces of oil, revealing the subtle persistence of the catastrophe across hundreds of miles. Economies dependent on the sea felt the spill's reach in practical terms, with livelihoods disrupted by a hazard no one had fully mapped. Local stories recounted blackened nets, oily sediments, and fish behaving unusually, lending anecdotal weight to scientific observations. In this way, the Amoko Cadiz's influence spread far beyond the immediate wreck site, threading uncertainty into the daily rhythms of maritime life. The Amoko Cadiz became a cautionary tale about the unpredictability of industrial risk and the hidden movements of the ocean, where currents conceal as much as they reveal. It was a reminder that even the most carefully designed operations could interact with natural forces in unexpected ways, producing consequences that were visible, hidden, and sometimes irretrievable. Observers were left to reckon not only with what they could see, but also with the vast unknown beneath the surface, where time, tides, and geography worked silently to shape the spill's enduring legacy. The spill's traces continue to drift silently, an invisible testament to the enduring interplay of human error and natural forces that remain beyond full comprehension. The Amoko Cadiz's legacy is both material and symbolic, a reminder of human ambition colliding with uncontrollable maritime power, and of how a single miscalculation can ripple outward, quietly, over vast distances and years. The ocean retains these traces as if in memory, leaving those who study it aware of both what is visible and what remains concealed in its depths. Far from the French coast, remnants of the Amoko Cadiz continue to drift in secret currents, carrying stories that no scientist or sailor has yet fully uncovered. the unexploded minefields beneath the seabed. Hidden under the shifting sands of northern waters lies a forgotten arsenal of explosives, remnants of conflicts that continue to haunt the seas decades later. Unlike visible wrecks or oil slicks, these ordnance fields remain largely invisible, their presence marked only by the uncertainty they cast over navigation, fishing, and scientific exploration. While the wars that created them ended long ago, the devices themselves have endured, moved by currents, storms, and seabed erosion, lying dormant yet potent. For those who venture into these waters, the danger is silent, unpredictable, and constant. During both World Wars, vast numbers of naval mines were deployed across strategic routes, designed to deny access and protect coastlines from enemy fleets. Britain and Germany, along with other nations bordering the North Sea, placed these weapons along shipping lanes, estuaries, and near ports. Some mines were set to drift with the currents, others anchored in fixed positions, all intended to destroy ships that entered forbidden zones. The strategic value was immense at the time, but the consequences stretched far beyond wartime objectives, leaving a legacy of peril that endures under calm seas. Sediment and silt have slowly claimed these devices, burying them in patterns dictated by currents, storms, and the ever-changing seabed topography. Shallow channels shift with each storm, sandbars move, and tidal flows rearrange the seabed, altering the location of mines over time. Some remain partially exposed, visible only to those with specialized equipment, while others are swallowed entirely by mud and sand. This shifting concealment transforms the North Sea into a constantly evolving hazard, where the precise location of threats is often unknowable and the sea's surface offers little warning. Sonar scans often yield deceptive results, mistaking rocks or debris for ordnance, while countless mines remain concealed under layers of mud, their locations impossible to confirm without direct investigation. Even modern survey vessels equipped with advanced sonar, magnetometers, and submersible cameras can only map a fraction of the seabed with precision. False positives are common, leading to cautious but necessary assumptions, and much of the unexplored area remains a blank space on navigational charts. The interplay between technology and uncertainty defines the ongoing struggle to understand what lies below. Occasionally, fishing trawlers or survey vessels encounter unexpected explosions, sudden reminders that the past is never truly gone from these waters. Nets are shredded, hulls rattled, and crews left with harrowing experiences that reinforce the unseen threat. Reports of minor detonations appear sporadically in maritime records, each incident illustrating the unpredictable nature of buried mines. Some are triggered by erosion, others by human activity, but all serve as proof that the conflict beneath the waves is far from over, even decades after hostilities ceased. Vessel operators must navigate a landscape of uncertainty, rerouting routes and adjusting trawling practices to avoid the invisible hazards that lurk below. Shipping companies maintain detailed minefield maps and coordinate with clearance teams, yet no chart can account for every device displaced by currents or storms. Fishing fleets alter routes seasonally, aware that a single miscalculation could lead to disaster. The need for vigilance is constant, attention amplified by the inability to see the true threat, leaving every voyage under the shadow of potential catastrophe. The chemical residues from corroding mines seep slowly into sediments, creating subtle environmental disturbances that ripple through benthic ecosystems. Metals corrode, explosives leak, and marine life comes into contact with substances that were never intended to linger for decades. While the immediate danger is explosive, the long-term ecological effects remain less visible but no less significant. Microhabitats near old minefields are often altered in ways scientists are still working to understand, revealing that the legacy of war is not only physical but chemical, embedded in the living environment. Specialized teams continue to map and neutralize known mines, yet vast swaths of these northern waters remain largely uncharted in terms of submerged explosives. Clearance operations rely on historical records, sonar scans, and painstaking manual verification. Entire regions remain unexamined, particularly in deeper channels or areas with shifting sediment. Even with decades of effort, the magnitude of remaining ordnance is uncertain. This uncertainty fuels both precautionary measures and anxiety among those who must rely on the waters for commerce and sustenance, making the North Sea a domain of quiet but persistent risk. Those working on vessels report an ever-present unease when operating over suspected minefields, aware that one wrong move could transform routine work into catastrophe. The tension is not hypothetical. Crews sense it in the stillness before a storm, in the subtle drag of nets, in the uncharted contours of the seabed. Every routine survey, every haul, is coloured by the knowledge that unseen explosives may lie just below. Such psychological weight, combined with the visible signs of human activity, trawl marks, sediment shifts, or sonar anomalies, creates an atmosphere of uncertainty that is difficult to quantify, but impossible to ignore. Storms, shifting currents, and seabed erosion may move dormant devices to new locations, leaving authorities unsure of precisely where danger still lies. Mines once safely mapped can drift into commercial lanes or fishing grounds, reintroducing hazard in places long considered secure. Predictive modelling helps, but no forecast can account for every variable, and the sea's natural turbulence constantly reshapes the underwater landscape. The combination of time, weather, and hydrodynamics ensures that even known minefields are never static, reinforcing the notion that the North Sea retains secrets the best technology cannot fully reveal. The surface may appear calm, yet a persistent and silent threat lies beneath, an underwater archive of conflict that defies human mastery. Tides sweep over dormant explosives, storms rearrange sediment, and currents ferry small particles of corrosion across long distances. Ships, trawlers, and research vessels navigate these waters with caution, knowing that even centuries-old ordnance remains active. The legacy of warfare endures in a way that is invisible yet profoundly consequential, a reminder that history is not confined to archives and museums, but can lie in wait under waves that seem tranquil to the unwary. Among the shifting sands and hidden channels, thousands of dormant explosives wait, a submerged legacy that could awaken at any moment. The disappearance of the rig supply vessel Bourbon Dolphin. February winds swept across the North Sea as the Bourbon Dolphin departed on routine anchor handling, vanishing shortly after into the frigid, unyielding waters. The incident stunned offshore operators and maritime authorities alike, leaving questions that persisted long after search and recovery efforts concluded. Unlike a sudden storm or mechanical failure easily observed and analysed, the vessel disappeared in a combination of human, mechanical, and environmental forces that left only fragments behind. Survivors recounted fleeting glimpses of chaos, while investigators faced a sea that seemed intent on keeping its secrets hidden. The Bourbon Dolphin's loss would become a modern testament to the North Sea's merciless unpredictability. Constructed with reinforced steel and powerful engines, the ship was purpose-built for transporting anchors and supplies to offshore platforms, carrying a crew trained for extreme conditions. Every system on board had been engineered to withstand the pressures of rough seas and the strain of moving massive equipment, yet even advanced design offered no guarantee against the North Sea's immense forces. Decks were reinforced, winches calibrated, and ballast carefully monitored, but human oversight remained a necessary counterbalance to technology. The vessel's reputation for reliability made its sudden capsize all the more shocking, highlighting the thin line between routine operation and catastrophe. Handling massive anchors and coordinating precise maneuvers demanded constant focus, with no allowance for mistakes in the unforgiving offshore environment. Crew members adjusted cables, monitored the vessel's stability, and worked with tugs that shifted in rhythm with the waves. Each movement of the anchor required calculation, timing, and coordination, and the slightest misalignment could amplify mechanical stress exponentially. The North Sea allowed no pause. What seemed like normal operational tension carried within it the potential for sudden disaster. Those familiar with anchor handling understood that even short deviations from protocol could cascade into events beyond control. Sudden gusts and unexpected swells battered the deck, forcing both crew and machinery to respond instantaneously to the shifting forces of wind and water. Waves rose unpredictably, colliding with the vessel at angles that challenged steering and ballast, while winches strained against the combined weight of anchors and turbulent currents. Instruments indicated the vessel's pitch and roll, yet in moments of extreme turbulence, data and human reflexes were insufficient to prevent instability. Even the most experienced personnel were confronted with forces that exceeded prior operational experience, reminding them that the North Sea remained the ultimate authority. In a matter of moments, violent rolling and mechanical strain caused the vessel to tip beyond recovery, leaving little chance for those aboard to react. Witnesses described the roll as sudden and extreme, a swift motion that overwhelmed the ship's stability. Equipment shifted violently across the deck, and some safety mechanisms were rendered useless under the strain. For the crew, seconds stretched as chaos erupted, yet the North Sea demanded little mercy. When the Bourbon Dolphin finally capsized, it did so with a speed and force that left only fragments floating in the icy water and a handful of survivors clinging to life. Helicopters and rescue vessels navigated icy waters, battling waves and wind to recover survivors and wreckage. Yet much of the ship remained lost to the sea. Search teams worked tirelessly, deploying divers, sonar scans, and surface patrols to locate wreckage. Recovery was hampered by turbulent conditions, low temperatures, and shifting debris, leaving critical pieces of the vessel unaccounted for. Survivors reported the trauma of exposure, cold, and disorientation, illustrating the human toll of such sudden maritime disasters. The rescue itself became a race against time, with nature asserting control at every turn. Disputes arose as investigators examined the disaster, with some pointing to procedural errors, while others highlighted flaws in design and equipment. Norwegian and international authorities collaborated on inquiries, analysing ballast distribution, anchor handling procedures, and crew actions. Reports diverged, emphasising either operational misjudgments or technical shortcomings, fueling debate over responsibility. The lack of definitive conclusions compounded the tragedy, leaving families, maritime professionals, and the industry with lingering uncertainty. Each report illuminated aspects of the disaster, while simultaneously deepening the mystery of why the vessel capsized so quickly. Stability assessments and load distribution studies revealed that multiple small failures combined, creating conditions that made capsizing almost inevitable under certain circumstances. The vessel's centre of gravity, the weight of the anchors, and the force of waves was scrutinised, showing that minor miscalculations or misalignments could trigger a rapid chain reaction. Even though the Bourbon Dolphin was engineered for resilience, no combination of mechanical strength or redundancy could have fully countered the simultaneous stresses of equipment, weather, and operational procedures. In this, the incident illustrated the complex interplay between human, machine, and environment that defines North Sea operations. Operators familiar with North Sea operations describe the constant tension of high-risk work, where a single miscalculation can transform routine tasks into life-threatening moments. Training, experience, and teamwork mitigate hazards, yet nothing could eliminate the inherent dangers of moving massive anchors through turbulent waters. Stories from offshore personnel highlight how quickly control can slip away, how rapidly the sea's forces can amplify minor errors, and how vulnerable even the strongest vessels remain. The Bourbon Dolphin's loss remains a cautionary tale, a reminder that knowledge and experience are necessary but not sufficient in these extreme conditions. Industry protocols were revised following the incident, including stricter anchor handling procedures and enhanced safety measures, yet the sea's unpredictability remains a formidable challenge. Changes in training, safety audits, and equipment monitoring aim to prevent repetition of such disasters, yet the North Sea offers no guarantees. Each subsequent operation is informed by lessons learned, yet the potential for unforeseen events lingers. The Bourbon Dolphin serves as both a case study and a warning. In the world of offshore operations, meticulous planning must always contend with the sea's persistent and uncontrollable force. Even with careful documentation and analysis, the suddenness of the Bourbon Dolphin's loss continues to haunt the memory of those who study and traverse these waters. Experts, operators, and historians alike examine the event for patterns and insights, yet uncertainty endures. The vessel's final moments, the exact sequence of failures, and the complete human experience remain partially obscured, as if the North Sea itself has claimed those answers. Each discussion of the incident carries a dual sense of knowledge gained and mystery preserved, highlighting the profound tension between human endeavour and natural power. The exact moment and manner in which the Bourbon Dolphin vanished remain veiled by the sea, leaving a mystery no investigation has fully solved. The phantom sonar contacts. Muffled beeps and faint blips began appearing on sonar screens, marking the first signs of movement that defied explanation beneath the North Sea's surface. Naval operators in the late Cold War years grew increasingly aware of signals that did not correspond to any known vessel or natural phenomenon. Initially dismissed as equipment glitches, the anomalies persisted with a consistency that made them difficult to ignore. Each sonar ping hinted at a presence moving deliberately yet invisibly through waters long charted and patrolled. The North Sea, long a corridor of commerce and conflict, now seemed to harbour secrets that no map or manual could fully capture. Cold War patrols relied on constant vigilance, with vessels crisscrossing the sea to monitor shipping lanes and detect any unauthorised underwater activity. Sonar operators scanned the depths for submarines, mines and other hazards, while surface ships maintained precise formations to maximise coverage. Communication channels were monitored continuously, with intelligence officers reviewing logs and cross-checking sightings against Allied and commercial traffic. Yet despite this coordination, operators occasionally encountered contacts that refused to conform to expected patterns, creating tension between operational protocol and unexplained observation. Early logs noted anomalies that seemed to vanish when approached, leaving operators both curious and unsettled by the inconsistent signals. At times, contacts would appear in clusters, only to dissipate moments later without a trace. Investigators found that the anomalies sometimes coincided with sonar blind spots, yet at other times they defied logical explanation, moving through areas considered thoroughly monitored. Crew members began documenting each occurrence meticulously, aware that repeated anomalies hinted at a pattern that could reveal something extraordinary or something deliberately hidden. Repeated contacts appeared at irregular intervals, their movements not matching any known submarine, marine creature or natural phenomenon. Shapes and velocities recorded on the sonar defied expectations, oscillating between speeds too fast for conventional vessels and trajectories too precise to be random. Some operators reported what they described as sudden vertical ascents or sideways shifts that seemed to violate conventional oceanic physics. The data resisted simple categorization, leaving analysts with questions about whether they were observing technology, a natural anomaly, or something entirely outside prior understanding. Technicians exchanged uneasy glances as equipment hummed with unidentified echoes, each new ping raising questions they could not answer. Some reported a sense of awareness from the signals themselves, as if the contacts reacted to the presence of human observers or military craft. Observers described moments of heightened tension, where the ordinary rhythm of sonar monitoring was interrupted by a recurring, inexplicable presence. Conversations aboard the vessels shifted to speculation, yet each hypothesis only seemed to deepen the sense of mystery. The human experience of uncertainty became as palpable as the technical evidence itself. Engineers scrutinized the sonar data, aware that interference, reflection, and technical glitches could produce false readings, yet some anomalies persisted beyond logical explanation. Wave patterns, salinity shifts, and temperature gradients were all considered, as were mechanical calibration issues, but none could account for the repeated occurrences. Detailed analyses suggested that whatever was generating the signals could move in ways unlike any known submarine, yet produced echoes that resembled intelligent propulsion rather than random drift. The tension between known science and unexplained observation created a persistent unease among those charged with interpreting the readings. Reports filed at the time remained partially classified, with redactions hinting at sensitive operations that the public would never fully see. Declassified documents revealed only fragments, instances of anomalous contacts, crew testimonies, and partial investigations. References to underwater objects of unknown origin and contacts of interest appeared in logs, but the details were carefully circumscribed. Scholars and journalists who later reviewed the material noted that the redactions themselves contributed to the aura of secrecy, emphasizing that some explanations were withheld, perhaps intentionally, from public scrutiny. Speculation ranged from submerged wrecks and unusual currents to foreign submarines testing stealth tactics, yet none accounted for the full scope of the signals. Historians have suggested that abandoned vessels, shifting sandbanks, and cold water thermoclines could produce anomalous sonar readings, while others point to experimental submarines or covert intelligence operations. Each theory carries plausibility, yet fails to fully encompass the repetitive, reactive, and sometimes deliberate behaviour recorded by sonar operators. the true source remains an enigma, bridging the line between technological limitation and genuine mystery. Commanders adjusted patrol routes and heightened alert levels, treating the unexplained contacts as potential threats even without concrete evidence of intrusions. Protocols required crews to respond with caution, altering course and increasing sonar sweeps, while intelligence reports monitored broader patterns. Exercises intended to track known vessels occasionally revealed additional anomalies, reinforcing the notion that the North Sea contained unknown variables beneath the surface. Even in the most controlled operations, uncertainty loomed, shaping strategy and fostering a culture of vigilance and suspicion. Decades later, analysts revisiting historical logs encounter echoes that remain unresolved, offering glimpses of a North Sea that continues to conceal its secrets. Modern sonar and mapping technology can reconstruct past readings with greater accuracy, yet anomalies persist, resisting complete explanation. Scientists and naval historians acknowledge that some signals may have had mundane origins, while others remain tantalizingly elusive, their source unknown and possibly unknowable. The North Sea, once mapped meticulously for commerce and defence, reveals in its depths a world partially hidden from both human understanding and machinery. Even with advanced mapping and sonar technology, the depths reveal only partial truths, leaving much of the underwater landscape cloaked in uncertainty. Currents, thermoclines, and submerged structures interact to create a complex acoustic environment where signals may be distorted or amplified unpredictably. Some echoes may have been artifacts of the sea itself, yet others demonstrate consistency in behaviour suggesting intelligence or deliberate movement. For the operators who recorded them, the uncertainty became a persistent companion, a reminder that even sophisticated instruments cannot fully reveal what lies beneath. Each ping that returned to the sonar screens carried the eerie suggestion of a presence that was watching, moving and perhaps aware of being observed. Somewhere below the surface, the phantom movements persist, recorded only in fading sonar traces that no one has yet been able to fully interpret.